He's just said second to...
Okay, that's perfect. Alison is second.
Okay.
Me here?
Okay, yeah, sure. No, I can juggle.
Welcome, everybody. If you haven't yet taken your seats, please do. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we kick off how to be a Coptimist, and it's great to see so many Coptimists turned out in the audience. We are live streaming today, so I'll welcome our online audience as well, and all of you can help them feel part of what's happening in the room by tweeting using the hashtag Coptimism. Just a few key things to bear in mind. If you hear a fire alarm, it's real, don't panic, just make your way through these doors, straight on out into the outside courtyard bit, and we've been assured that there will be people in the know there to help us do what we need to do next. And toilets are just through these doors and in the main courtyard, men on the left, women on the right. And after that very practical notes, I'll hand over to the wonderful Deborah Bull, who will give our opening address.
Madame?
Thank you, and just ignore the crutch, it's temporary. Thank you very much. I'm Deborah Bull. I'm Assistant Principal at King's College London, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all here today. It's particularly exciting to see such a wide range of institutions. We have funding and strategic bodies, environmental organizations, policymakers, artists, art organizations, of course, and researchers, academics, and I hope some students amongst the mix. The breadth of your collective experience and the breadth of the program today underlines what I think is now a universally accepted truth, that the global challenges that we face, and climate change is foremost amongst them, are not going to be solved. They shouldn't and can't be solved by the scientific community working alone. If we're going to find alternative approaches, new solutions, it's going to be by working together, not by working in silos. And my role at King's is about convening exactly those sorts of conversations, bringing together different voices and providing a neutral space where the rigor of academic analysis can help to unlock new ideas and new perspectives. Over the last 4 years, we've worked hard to create spaces where those shared conversations can take place, connecting researchers across the full range of disciplines at King's with partners across and outside the university. And we also invite the public to engage with academic thinking through those cultural collaborations. Two relevant recent examples of this, amongst many, would be the Reimagining Water Futures collaboration and Amy Sharrock's Museum of Water, which invited the public to consider their own relationship with this most precious of our assets. And I think these open and porous conversations are vitally important because the solutions to our big contemporary challenges are not going to be found in one single idea or discipline. It's going to be a combination of technological advances, human creativity, and significant changes to public attitudes and behaviors. Scientific research will, of course, be essential, but I passionately believe that arts and culture have a role to play too. For 3 reasons. First, because artists can encourage innovation by inspiring scientists to new ways of thinking. Artists share the characteristics of great innovators. They're acute observers of human behavior. They unite the head and the hand. They experiment with instinctive knowledge. They see connections in unexpected places. They seek ways to subvert our habitual responses. They're passionate and they're driven. And they see the world not as it is, but as it could be. The second reason is because arts engagement helps develop the creativity that drives invention. John Maynard Keynes, in his essay on Isaac Newton, wrote this: "Proofs, for what they are worth, are dressed up afterwards. They are not the instrument of discovery." Now, he didn't add, but I would, that creativity is the instrument of discovery. And there are plenty of studies that have proved this link. The link between arts engagement and creativity, studies looking at school children in Hong Kong, student nurses in the US, or commercial businesses in Sweden. And finally, I think art has a role to play in driving change because it offers a powerful way of engaging the public with these global concerns. Art communicates without words. It can bypass our heads and get straight to our hearts. And it can convey complex ideas in ways that have more meaning for some people than tables, graphs, and charts. All of this helps create a greater collective understanding of the problem and can help to drive the shifts in behavior that are going to be required in sustainable solutions. The AHRC's Cultural Value Project report, launched last week, offered a number of conclusions as to why art might be effective in helping us think and act on climate change. The report talked about the ways in which art works obliquely to bypass mental defenses, how it suspends automatic responses, forces us to reimagine, how it translates abstract notions into narratives on a human scale, and how by showing the familiar in an unfamiliar light, it can shock and upset our complacency. And finally, the report talks about how art might be effective in this area precisely because it provides a space where experiment and risk-taking can take place. And as I read that part of the report, I thought back to Wired Aerial Theatre's production, As the World Tipped, a powerful performance that for me had much more visceral impact than any of the news reports of the Copenhagen 2009 summit. The AHRC report also found that art can construct a space where the expertise of science can engage a lay public on environmental issues, amongst others. And this is exactly what we're aiming to do with Science Gallery London, which is going to open on our Guy's campus in 2017. The gallery will offer a dedicated space, 3 floors, in which artists, researchers, students, and local communities can come together, igniting discovery where science and art collide. Each year, we'll work with big thinkers across health, science, technology, arts, media, policy, and more to identify key contemporary themes and challenges. And then we'll ask artists and scientists to work together to propose new solutions and new ways of thinking about those challenges. The London Gallery is part of a global science gallery network, and it includes universities in Melbourne, in Dublin, and in the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru. And this international network will help invite the public to take part in a global conversation about some of these global challenges. Amusingly, the gallery is going to occupy a space that has for the last 20 years been home to McDonald's. And so it's particularly appropriate that our most recent pre-opening season, Fed Up, The Future of Food, explored the environmental and sustainability challenges related to food production and consumption. It invited audiences to re-examine their own approach to food and to consider potential alternatives to food production and consumption. And the future themes will almost certainly include some of the topics that you'll be discussing today. So I hope that in years to come we'll be working with many of you as the gallery and its programs come on stream. Finally, we're hosting today's conference at King's as part of our Utopia 2016 season, in collaboration with our close neighbours Somerset House and the Courtauld Institute. Utopia 2016 is not just about imagining new futures, it's about bringing together the different voices, ideas and energies that can help make those futures a reality. And I hope that today's event will be a real step along the way to a new future, a future in which arts, culture and creativity contribute not only to new solutions, but to a new public narrative around climate change and sustainability. We're very delighted to have you all at King's today. I hope you have a creative and productive afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to open the proceedings and share these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. That's a fantastic opening, and welcome everyone here. I'm just going to put a bit of a framework around today, and then we'll charge off and hear some of these amazing speakers that we've got. Today, fundamentally, is about how, and I hope you all leave feeling a little bit more, knowing a little bit more and feeling a little bit more optimistic. Not tentative, but actually inspired and raring to go, with a sense not of the possible, but of the probable. There's no one better at this moment to quote than Christiana Figueres, Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, who recently said that for 6 years she stubbornly, relentlessly injected optimism into the system, an approach which magnificently delivered the Paris Agreement. She defines optimism as courage, hope, trust, and solidarity. And we're adding one more word to that. We're putting in C for creativity, the C in Coptimism. And today we have some of the ideas and the people that exemplify that C, that creative courage, hope, trust, and solidarity. There are plenty of them, many of them in this room. But by and large, the creative community has not been considered, and nor has it presented itself as a critical part of the solution. In spite of the huge impact the creative and cultural sector has on people's lives, it is still considered peripheral to the global challenges such as sustainability, biodiversity, and climate change. And this is such a waste. In this room now, there are people from design, broadcasting, publishing, film, advertising, fashion, literature, music, theatre, visual arts, galleries, and museums. Together, these disciplines shape how we all, wherever we are, experience the world. We could use this so well. But the lack of join-up, both within the creative community and especially beyond it, means that we are a really chronically untapped resource. So, how to be a Coptimist then? Well, it's the doing, we all know that. It's the day-to-day, the creating, the making, and the presenting. But it is also bringing creative and cultural voices into the company of influential leaders in the sustainability field systematically as a matter of course. It means understanding how cultural policy and investment can align with sustainability and climate change. It means prompting a cultural economy that reinforces the emerging creative movement. It means those outside the creative community understand better the sector as communicator, using our full range and capacity. And finally, it means using the creativity inherent in the work we do to create and scale sustainable solutions. So I hope we cover some of that today. Without further ado, I want to introduce the panel, invited because between them, they are both expert and exceptional in what they do. They represent a body of influence that is bigger than the sum, and they haven't talked to each other like this before. So our key question today is how to talk to one another so that the contributions of policy, of strategy, and of designers and the creative industries can be optimized in the context of the Paris Agreement and in the context of Coptimism. Firstly, I'm just going to introduce them, not in the order that they're going to speak. Patrick de Georges, he's come as an individual, very clear that he's come not in his capacity as French Minister of Ecology, which will give him the opportunity to speak more freely. But he does work at the French Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy with responsibilities, this is very intriguing for me, that include large predators. And I don't know how many tigers there are in Paris, but I'm sure you're talking about human beings, which is a whole other issue. Patrick's a policy poet, a philosopher with an artist's take on sustainability. Vive la France. Then we have the independent crossbench peer, Baroness Lola Young, chair of the all-party parliamentary group on ethics and sustainability and fashion. Lola, for many of you will know, has campaigned relentlessly on forms of enslavement, young people in care, sustainability, with a constant focus on social justice. Then we have Darren Henley, the Chief Executive of Arts Council England, a champion of culture and the arts who understands better than most what an engaged arts sector prizing education looks like, now leading the Arts Council that has done more than any other globally to generate an environmentally literate and passionate arts sector using simple, light-touch policy as a prompt for long-term cultural transformation. Then we have Heather Ackroyd, one half of the internationally celebrated artist partnership Ackroyd and Harvey. She's a sculptor. They use sculpture, photography, biology and ecology, just some of the disciplines to intersect in their work, reflecting both scientific and environmental concerns. Together, they've produced profoundly moving living work that connects the human soul to the knotty complexity of climate change and the joys of biodiversity. The work really does speak for itself. And finally, and to kick us off, we have Nick Nuttall, who's the Head of Communications and Outreach and spokesperson for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and no stranger to the arts himself, having had a brief career as a pop singer who still regularly treads the boards. I've heard him, actually. For anyone who has listened to Christiana Figueres over the last 6 years, that was them. That's me, sorry. I'm upstaging Heather. For anybody who's listened to Christiana Figueres over the last 6 years, it's worth knowing that Nick has been responsible for her speeches. And those speeches have done more to actually inspire us and to give us the kinds of global messages that have moved us all so much and actually made Cop21 possible. So thank you, Nick. I'm going to open you up so that you can... I've messed up.
And this is a very dangerous laptop, actually, I can see, so we have to be very delicate with it, yes? Has to be loving and caring and...
Be loving and caring and all kinds of
Oh,
things.
what amazing pictures. You should see this laptop, honestly. Well, look, thank you very much indeed, Alison, for that very kind introduction, and thank you very much for having me on this distinguished panel here of so many clever and motivated people, and thank you very much for the whole audience for being here. I want to perhaps briefly outline why we should all be Coptimists. I don't know if you know why they call it Coptimists. In the UN system, we call these annual meetings on climate change, we call them COPs, Conference of the Parties. So I think that's why we have the word Coptimist. So maybe because of the Paris Agreement, I can outline briefly why we all should feel pretty positive. But then maybe introduce a little bit of urgency into this, because we don't want to be self-deluded like perhaps Jane Austen's Emma, or overly complacent like Shakespeare's Falstaff. For many of you in this room, the last few months have been nothing short of remarkable. If you're one of those people, and I'm sure many of you are, who have worked for over 20 years, millions and millions of people, of scientists, economists, of social activists, social justice people, the whole suite of society that has campaigned and worked hard to get a global climate agreement, you must be thinking this is a pretty remarkable moment. Because I cannot tell you how weird it feels to have a Paris Agreement, how weird it feels to have a global agreement on climate change. Because climate change was the definition of the incapability of humanity to come together on a really challenging topic. It was almost a definition of the failure of the United Nations to, in a sense, in this modern 21st century world, operate and bring and convene nations together in common cause. It was almost a defining element of the kind of selfish interests of so many over the great vision and spirit of what it can be to be a human being. And yet, we are here. And to quote that great singer Dina Washington, and this will be the last of my crass references to the arts, what a difference a day makes. Because indeed, when that gavel came down in Paris on the 12th of December in 2015 with Laurent Fabius banging it down, we had a clear signal that the impossible could be the possible, that countries could come together, a confirmation that every nation on this planet had finally internalized the science, understood the economics of lethargy versus the opportunity of action, and had basically decided and set the course for a very new and decisive period in human affairs. Nothing short. And what was different about Paris to all those other COPs that came before in many ways was the sheer breadth of engagement. I mean, the fact is that we recorded before on a little portal we have called the Nazca portal, something like 11,000 commitments by cities, by the private sector, by investors, by provinces, by regions. So many people contributed commitments in the run-up to Paris saying, we want to do this, that there was a very, very different atmosphere in Paris. Many people said to me, oh, Nick, you must have been very stressed in Paris. I said, no, I was very busy, a bit sweaty, but I was never stressed, because for the first time I knew we were going to get this agreement. What we didn't know was how good it would be. And I think there were other factors that came to play in this. There were the arts in Paris. Many, many examples of the arts there. And the religious input. The Pope made a fantastic report and speech. Faith leaders from the Islamic communities, from the Buddhist communities. So many people spoke out saying we wanted to do this. And civil society, of course, with those great marches in 2014 and 2015, the people's marches in New York and in London and in Kampala and in Sao Paulo and. there was a really good buzz around the Paris Agreement. And you know what? The days of saying, this is a big global problem, let's leave it up to governments, it's nothing to do with me. There were enough people out there in the world who said, this is something to do with me. And they stood up and they were counted. We also know now that the stated aim of the Paris Agreement, and the stated aim for a while, to keep a global temperature rise under 2 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels this century, or better, 1.5 degrees centigrade, is also doable now. It's actually doable. Climate change solutions didn't begin on the 12th of December or in the run-up to Paris. They've been going on for a long time, and many of you have been part of it, either wittingly or unwittingly. And we know that as a result of this huge heavy lifting over 20 years under this UN convention, we know now that solar power is 80% cheaper. We know wind is 40% cheaper and hugely more efficient. Just look at the turbines off the coast of England. The efficiencies there have surpassed anything anybody ever thought. And we have other litmus tests why we should be Coptimists. Trillions of dollars are now moving out of fossil fuels into clean energy. In fact, I don't know if you read the headline on the 13th of April, but the headline said, coal slump sends mining giant Peabody Energy into bankruptcy. Peabody is a coal giant. It's gone bankrupt. Shell pulled out of the Arctic. It drilled and drilled and drilled, and it didn't hit enough oil. It lost billions. People have been handing back their leases in the Arctic. The US government, the Norwegian government have said, no more drilling under this current administration in the Arctic. That is an enormous change. And what's an even more enormous change is, I can remember only a few years ago when the oil price was low, right? Renewable energy was like, that's the end of renewable energy investments. Not this time round. It's the oil companies that are in trouble. It's the oil companies that can't make money under $75 a barrel. And the renewable energy investments are carrying on just as they did before. There needs to be more, but it's $250 billion a year, and it just keeps going. It's a very, very different world to even 5 or 6 years ago. So I could go on. Yeah, I was just in New York the other week. 170-odd countries signed the Paris Agreement. I don't know if you realize it's a 3-stage rocket. You adopt it in Paris. You have to sign it, and you can't send it by email. You have to physically rock up and get your pen out and actually sign a piece of paper. And over 170 governments did that. It's a record in the history of international UN treaties. A record that one day over 170 countries signed. It's never happened before. Last time was the Law of the Sea. That was in the early 1980s. 119 signatures. But this is where I think we have to get a bit smart, right? This is where the Coptimism has to be maintained, but also a bit of Cop realism has to come in as well. Because, you know, if Paris was like Leicester City winning the Premiership, right? Sorry, I was listening to BBC the other day. Everybody's talking about Leicester City. I support Burnley, actually, but they got overshadowed by Leicester. But anyway, the question is, what happens to Leicester next season? And in the case of climate change, what happens to Leicester or the Paris Agreement in 2020? And what happens, is Leicester still in the Premiership? And is climate change still in the Premiership in terms of action in 2030? That's an important date. And will there be a Premiership for Leicester to be in the second half of this century? That's another crucial time. Because the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that while the Paris Agreement was absolutely awesome, the Paris Agreement has in it some very hard realities. And those realities are that if we are going to keep under a 2 degrees centigrade rise this century, and better 1.5, because that's the only chance that the small islands will have if we stay under 1.5, is we need to peak the global emissions, and we need to peak them soon, 2020. We need a deep decarbonization of the global economy, nothing short, and we need sometime in the second half of this century to have emissions so low on this planet that healthy forests, healthy soils, healthy ecosystems like the mangroves and the salt marshes and the seagrasses can absorb. It's about returning the balance of planet Earth to how it was before the Industrial Revolution. Nothing short. But in a 21st century setting, of 21st century lifestyles and 21st century technologies. That is a huge challenge. So the heavy lifting really starts now. And that's why you all need to be involved. Can we do it? Yes. We can do it. But we do it today. We do it today. You do it today. We all do it today. Every single person on this planet does it today. We need to start now. Nothing should be being put in this planet. No road, no power station, no hospital, nothing, no agriculture practices. Nothing should be happening that doesn't first say, does this meet the Paris Agreement of keeping a temperature rise under 2 degrees C and better 1.5? If it doesn't do that, that has to be an incredible justification why it should be allowed. Because otherwise, we are nothing short than selling the hopes and dreams that were born in Paris and the hopes and dreams of 7 billion people alive today, and by 2050, 10 billion, we are selling them down the Swanee River, which I know is another song, so I do apologize if I said it. But if we can get it right, there is trillions of dollars out there right now. We know since the economic and financial crisis, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars all sitting there wondering what to do. All sitting there looking for quality investments. All sitting there for the signal. Paris has given the signal, but the signal needs to keep blinking all the time from now on as we go down this pathway to decarbonization. Everybody's pulling in the right direction, don't get me wrong. That's what Paris says. Everybody knows the direction, everybody knows the journey, everybody knows where they need to go. They just need to move fast. So, how do we get to you guys, the creative industry? I think there's a lot that you can do. Okay, advocacy. That's pretty obvious, you know. We've got Leonardo DiCappuccino. All we need is Kate Winswept, and problem solved. No. We need advocacy at all levels of the creative arts, advocacy at all levels. And we also need to know that you are all investors, you're owners and operators of buildings and infrastructure in your own right, you're all decision makers in terms of supply chains, you are influencers of governments, you have relationships with local authorities, and you need to start making the choices about how you are going to be part of the societal change which everybody's got to take on board. I hope you're going to be inspired by today's conference. I was looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this Creative Climate Coalition that's going to come out of this meeting very much. The fact is we all have the responsibility to act, and actually the choice of being responsible today has never been easier. Only a few years ago, I think we would have all been called cop pessimists. Trying to find a climate agreement was like never-ending. It was like the mousetrap in the West End. It was a tragedy of comedy. A tragic comedy of errors, a misunderstanding everywhere. But Paris has ended that. Paris, on that day on the 15th, was a bit like the wedding at the end of Shakespeare's As You Like It. And we had the heroism for many years of Tolkien's Gandalf. And now we need the steady energy and ambition of Pip in Dickens's Great Expectations. And we need the courage, endurance, and perhaps most importantly, the speed of Eric Liddell, who was a real person in Putnam's Chariots of Fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Lola, do you want to?
Oh, okay. You want me to go there?
It's up to you.
Okay. I think I'll stay here. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, yeah, I'm co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the all-party parliamentary group on ethics and sustainability in fashion. And it may sound like sort of incongruity to do something around fashion in the House of Lords, but we have a whole system of all-party parliamentary groups which are meant to encourage, as the name suggests, cross-party coming together on specific issues. We have about 500 of them and a very wide range of subjects. And I set this one up in, I think, 2009, 2010, with a great deal of help from Dilys and her crew at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. And the idea was to engage politicians across both houses, House of Commons and the House of Lords, and from all parties on this very specific issue. Now, as you might imagine, it was actually quite difficult to engage with politicians on this subject. I think the way in which they look at the creative industries and the arts is somewhat different to the way that many of us might look at them. So the idea of this group was to raise awareness, obviously around ethics and sustainability in the fashion industry, and to help to think about how we could develop policies, legislation, and so on that would improve the situation. Now, I couple these two, ethics and sustainability, because a number of us do believe that it's not just about the environment. Obviously, that's a big enough thing on its own, but actually it's very closely intertwined in many of our views with issues around social justice, with issues around poverty, with unfair labour conditions, and so on and so forth. So we tend to think of those two areas as being as one. Now, sort of thinking about them in that way, it does sort of throw up big issues for government, and I should stress I'm not involved in government, okay? It's not me, I'm not the government. I always have to make that clear. And I don't belong to a political party. But the problem that we come across, I think, in government, certainly here, is that kind of siloed thinking. And however many administrations come in and say, yeah, we're going to work across government, we're going to get joined up government, it never actually comes to pass. So how can we make sure that politicians are aware of the connections between these different areas and not actually set up in competition? So you can sadly have a situation where something that is being promoted, let's say in the Department for Environment or through the Home Office in relation to modern slavery, might be contested by the business department because they feel it's not in the best interest of business. They want to cut down what they see as red tape and regulation and, you know, sort of realize the dream of eternal free enterprise. So it's really quite a job we have on hand to try and bring these different areas together to make sure they're not working in competition. I mentioned just now, just very briefly, the Modern Slavery Act, but I do think it's quite important, as I say, because of the connections with the issues that arise from thinking about the environment in relation, particularly in relation to the fashion industry. So if you think about places where these terrible tragedies have happened, inevitably there is a link between what happens to the environment around them, the bad working conditions that people endure, the terrible conditions in which many of them live, and so on and so forth. So that interconnection is very important to make. I think that it's interesting looking at the Arts Council's journey, and I know that Darren obviously will elaborate on this when he comes to talk, but I do think it feels to me like there's a kind of sense of moving forward on this in a way which we haven't yet managed to do in Parliament. So this separation between people who have very strong ideas about the environment or about sustainability, not connecting that with the arts. The arts seem to be seen predominantly as a little bit of a cash cow for the economy at the moment. It's one of the growing areas. It's seen as having social and economic and regeneration benefits, but linking that up with the potential of what it could do in relation to environmental issues, I don't think has yet been realized. Environment is seen as a very separate issue, and whenever I speak in debates about fashion, the fashion industry, in terms of its pollution, in terms of its waste and overconsumption, I get politicians saying to me, oh, we hadn't really thought of it in those terms. But then again, when we come to the next debate, they still don't seem to be able to make those connections. So we have to work really hard on that. And this comes down to, I think, an issue of leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I don't just mean a top-down approach. I mean people who are prepared to stand up and say, you need to do things differently. So I think for leaders within the cultural and creative sector need to take on politics maybe in a more explicit way, need to think about the political realities and be really knowledgeable about how the political system works. Having sort of straddled the two sectors, I often find that there's a real lack of understanding amongst the cultural and creative sector about politics, and really a kind of I don't know, maybe a diffidence or a sort of fear or anxiety about bridging that gap between the two areas. But it's absolutely necessary with regard to this particular subject. It's really necessary to engage, whether that's with local councils around waste and what happens to waste in local areas, and or whether it's with the mayors, those regions and areas that have mayors, and of course we have our mayoral election tomorrow, and you know who's been raising it as an issue in the mayoralty. I mean, I don't sort of really see the visibility of arts, creative sector and so on discussing that or attempting to discuss that with the candidates. It seems to have been dominated by other things, strangely. So I think leadership is really important in terms, as I say, of getting on to parliamentarians and politicians and saying what the kinds of things that the arts and creative sector does do best, which has already been mentioned. It's about how we can explain things in a different way, how we can provoke thoughts of people to think in a different way, how we can enable people to approach some of these issues in a way that makes them feel that they've got some agency, some sort of autonomy, rather than being sort of powerless and without any ways or means of influencing what happens. So I think that's really important. And just one other thing I would say, which is a general note around this area. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in this country it feels very much to me that there's still an image around environmentalism that is around very white, very middle class, you know, and to engage a more diverse population. We don't seem to have been able to crack that at all in this country. I don't know what the answers are, but I do know what the situation we've got at the moment is unsatisfactory, because sometimes it plays out as a kind of powerful perception that it's kind of white folks in the first developed world doing things that might help some brown people across the world. Now, obviously, I'm caricaturing there, but I do think that sometimes when I attend some of these conferences and meetings and so on and so forth, with the best of intentions, we're not getting to people in this country as a diverse audience as we should be. So I think the more people we can engage, the better it will be. Thanks.
Hello, and thank you to Alison and to Julie's Bicycle for inviting me to join the panel. As many of you know, the Arts Council has been working in partnership with Julie's Bicycle since 2007. So that together we can support the sector both in practical ways and in developing high-level strategic thinking and leadership around the issue of sustainability. So it's a real great pleasure to be here talking about our joint work. Excuse me. Just up the road at the National Theatre is a new publicly accessible high-level walkway. And standing there, you can watch the day-to-day operation of the theatre. It's like being inside a magical theatrical creation. And from the perspective of this walkway, we can all be insiders and see how great art is made. The concept is part of a recent redevelopment of the building, Howarth Tompkins, and supported by a sustainability grant from Arts Council England. And just as the walkway allows us to see inside the organisation's creative thinking and doing, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Arts Council's direction on environmental sustainability and what this means in practice. For us, sustainability goes hand in hand with resilience. It's environmentally responsible and it makes economic as well as social sense. And we support environmental sustainability through practical and effective investment. Our capital funding programme, through which we've invested nearly £260 million since 2012, improves organisational resilience by creating sustainable buildings that can be used more efficiently. We want to support organisations to become more sustainable and more innovative, including increasing their environmental performance and reducing their carbon emissions. And since 2012, we've asked our regularly funded organisations, our national portfolio and our major partner museums to understand their impact and to do two things. One, to collect environmental data, and two, to create plans for acting on environmental sustainability. We're proud that we're the first cultural funding body in the world to attempt this, and the efforts of arts organisations in England have been an inspiration to the arts globally. This wouldn't have been possible without the willingness of the sector, or the experience and expertise of Julie's bicycle. Working together, we've formed a highly effective partnership. And our collaboration with Julie's bicycle has introduced new ways of working for all of us. Our funding supports not only the mechanics of compliance, the environmental reporting tools, help and support, but also the kind of stimulating thought leadership on display in this conference. All this backstage activity has led to some impressive results in public. So if that gives you a glimpse of some of the behind-the-scenes activity, what is the result? Well, I'll give you a few statistics. Since we started out on this, participation among our funded organisations has risen from 14% in 2012 to 98% in 2015, with 40% of those exceeding minimum requirements. More than £2.5 million has already been saved, and despite an increase in cultural activities, an annual 5% decrease achieved in carbon emissions. More than half of organisations reported financial and reputational benefits. Nearly 3/4 said that engaging in sustainability-related activities had improved team morale. So let me give you a few examples from around the country. Plymouth Theatre Royal saved £10,000 a year simply by changing its water management system. Tyne and Wear Archives and Museums recently won a Green Apple Award for helping other museums in the North East to become more environmentally friendly and save money. The MAC in Birmingham is projecting savings of £3,000 a year on its energy bill after installing efficient LED lighting. And the National Theatre's use of carbon monoxide detectors has saved the theatre £30,000 a year. We know there's still a lot more to do, and we know that the organisations that we invest in want to do more. As an Arts Council, we remain fully committed to supporting artists and arts and cultural organisations in their endeavours to transform themselves into low-carbon, sustainable and resilient sector. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Patrick de Georges, and I do work in the Ministry of Ecology, but I'm here on holiday. And so I will not give an institutional presentation, and I will not directly talk about the actions that we are leading now, but I'll be delighted to answer questions on the subject. I'm involved into designing of adaptation policies, and within the ministry, this is what I'm going to be talking about. I've been advocating the necessity to take into account into these policies. And today I will seize the occasion, the opportunity to say why I've been advocating that, and so this will be allow myself to be a bit personal in my presentation, which I usually can't do because I'm on holiday, so if you will accept that. So in order to try and explain that, I will begin with an example which does not have directly a connection with climate change. It's an example of adaptation to environmental change linked to the return of a wolf population in France. I'll be brief on that, but it will help us to understand the challenge of adaptation to climate change and also of mitigation if we have to keep under 1.5 or 2 degrees objective, which is what we are going to do. Sheep herding had developed in France since the 1970s in the Alps without having to face predation risk. Therefore, it was very vulnerable to predation where the wolf returned, attacking, of course, flocks and herds. And adaptations measures were put into place to face this environmental change. Technical measures to help herders protect their flocks, such as fences, guarding dogs, sheep herders, and economic means were also proposed to compensate for the losses. This policy has been conducted in France since the return of the wolf in 1992 and for more than 20 years with the objective of promoting cohabitation between herding and predators. But as the population and the territory occupied by wolf expand, the cost of compensation measures rises and the technical capacity to protect herds in different contexts reaches limits, leading in the last 5 years in France to an intensification of lethal, I don't know how you pronounce, lethal, thank you, shooting. And therefore reversing to a situation where cohabitation, which was the aim of this policy, and which was, with quite a certain success sustained by this policy, now seems impossible. So what can we learn from that? We can see that adaptation measures viable on the short term, 20 years, but they reveal themselves as the environmental change develop and expand, and sustainable on the long term. And this shows the limit of adaptation understood as an adjustment, a progressive adjustment process, and helps us to understand that we need to understand adaptation as a transformation process, a transformative process. That's why I introduced this with this example, which is quite easy to understand. So in France, to address cohabitation, what is needed also, apart from the measures of adaptation that have just progressive adjustment of a system, is a cultural change in the way the mountain areas are inhabited, used, concomitant with a cultural change in the ways we relate in the attitudes towards wars, going from warfare to diplomacy, if you want. And to put it briefly, if we want to believe the prophecy of Isaiah, that the wolf will sleep with the lamb, if we want to believe that this prophecy can become true and real, that supposes that we radically reconsider what wolves and lambs are capable of. And this cannot happen without a deep cultural transformation in the way we humans relate to wolves, sheep, mountain, biodiversity, etc. It supposes a paradigm shift from exploitation and antagonism to symbiotic, collaborative ways of living, a conversion. And without going back to St. Francis of Assisi, which the Pope had put the encyclical under his patronage, of course, and which is pertinent to our reflection here, or to Aldo Leopold in the United States with the land ethics, we can find in France individual sheep herders which had this interspecific and ecosystemic epiphany. This conversion has happened, and it is happening, with people re-understanding how they can relate to their territory and to animals. But that is why we see, in order to have this transformation and conversion diffuse in society, this is why we need humanities. This is why we need artists. This is why we need philosophy. This is why we need anthropologists, and so on. And in France, we have tried to put forward a program of environmental humanities in connection with that. And I can answer about this afterwards. So let's get back to climate change, because I have very short time. So climate change is a slow developing catastrophic risk, building up like a wave in the Okusai painting, if you see what I mean. And the hockey stick figure that is common to all the graphics representing the environmental impact of the great acceleration our societies have been caught into since the 1950s, intuitively show the limits of adaptation as a progressive adjustment. Quantitative change translates into qualitative change, and the relation of our relationship to the planet has changed qualitatively. This is what we try to address when, and has been addressed lately under the word of the understanding of the Anthropocene. We are entering a new geological era. So how can we interpret this novelty? And how can this link to the reflection of why artists are important to adaptation and mitigation policies? This is what I'm trying to conclude on now. What we're facing, what I believe and what I propose, is a radical transformation of our relationship to reality. So I'll try to make this clearer. If we consider the categories of modality, what we call real, effective, or existent is defined as what is in between the possible and the impossible. So with the profound transformation, environmental transformation, brought by climate change, what was possible is becoming impossible on certain territories. And what was considered as impossible is becoming possible by affecting the patterns of seasons, of regular patterns of seasons, the distribution of animals and plants, the availability of common resources such as water, the agricultural anticipation of what soils can produce, for example. Climate change is transforming the relationship of between what is possible and impossible on a given territory, and therefore the existential meaning of reality on this territory. And that's why adapting to climate change is so difficult to address, because it's not only a physical change that we can address technically speaking, it is metaphysical. Metaphysics is about reality and what we call reality. And it is a change in the existential fabric of our reality. And it is at that level that artists are necessary, because this is what artists do, and this is why we need them, because they question our sense of reality. Ceci n'est pas une pipe, as Magritte would put it briefly. I don't have very much time to develop that point. So the work of artists is therefore very similar to that of scientists. They render reflexively visible what has never been seen before, or audible what has never been heard before, thinkable what has not been thought. And it is clear that the role of the artist, such understood in that way, cannot be be limited to the simple communication or vulgarization or publicization of pre-existing ideas. If you understand artists in the way I just said, the idea of turning towards artists in order to try and publicize social engineering idea seems to be like more than a malentendu. It's a nonsense. So the fundamental laws from which, oh, sorry, I'm trying to go so fast that I get mixed up. So, on the contrary, by helping us to break with the recursivity of our cultural relationship to reality, by helping us to break with our prevailing assumptions, artists open the way to an open experimentation process, which is not that different from what scientists do in their laboratories. And I'll try to illustrate that briefly. Goethe, the founder, Goethe, the poet, the founder of the morphology, which is the science of living form, of morphology, was a poet. And he was not interested in simply inventorying the existing form of plants, but also to apprehend the matrix, the fundamental laws, I get to the point, rules from which vegetal forms are generated. And so committed to the imagination of forms that could be, those that did not yet exist, trying to understand the formative rules of novelty in plants and to bring these new forms into existence through the art and imagination of the poet. This was poiesis, at the strongest term of the meaning, which is, you see, the link between art and science and the vision here. And this can help us to understand the relationship between art, science, and policy, and in adaptation and mitigation context. The Global Environmental Outlook 2015 of the European Environmental Agency states that in order to reach the 2050 vision, we will need, and I'm quoting because this is worth it, profoundly transform our dominant, and I'm quoting, institution, practices, technologies, policies, lifestyles, and thinking. It doesn't give us a clue of how we're going to be able to do that, but it says that we should, if we want to reach our aim. And it is the same situation that we are facing with our objective of mitigation of 1.5 or 2 degrees. And it is the same situation that we are facing in certain territories where adaptive adjustment will not work, and when transformation has to be put into place. And this is why we need the cultural dimension. That is why we have, in order to reach this vision, to reflexively design a way to new environmental and social forms that yet do not exist. And in order to do that, aesthetical representation is as important as scientific modelization for policy making. I will try and wrap up. This is why we need to preserve transformative capabilities, if I may use this expression, on our territories. Pockets of future in the present with the freedom to experiment outside of the box of a dominant economic and cultural framework. And this point is very important in our national strategies for adaptation and national plans for adaptation. And this is something that we are trying to put into place in France. I would have liked to go on with 2 other considerations, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Boy, it's a tough act to follow a brilliant French philosopher. I'll give it a go. Okay, and start with a little bit of a sound blast. Oh, shall I do it from here?
Yes, I'm going to have to do it from here. Sorry about that. Whenever you want, just press the...
Go for it.
Just go for it. All right.
We got a deal! We got a deal that brings us to 100% clean energy.
This is the antidote to Copenhagen Cop15. This is when 2,000 people squeezed into a room, made history, and celebrated loud. They cried their cheers. It was a defining moment. It is a defining moment. And it hasn't come a minute too soon. I could argue that it really could have come sooner. And Dan and I have been working since 1990. And that was 2 years after NASA scientist James E. Hansen testified in front of the US Congress to say that he was 99% confident that the climate was warming, that there was a warming trend because of the burning of fossil fuels by human. So this was a defining moment. And at the time, the words the greenhouse effect were never very far from people's lips. And I actually made an artwork as well in response to this, which was a life-size camel with a coat of spring grass that dried in the very, very hot summer to bleached hay. And I was even down in print in some magazines saying that I predicted by 2050 that in the Northern Hemisphere we will be traveling around on camels. I mean, given the spate of deluge of water across the north this year, I might have to revise this prediction. In the 1990s, as the young British artists took center stage, the unleashing of the market forces took control. And it seemed as though global warming, as it was then termed, had sort of slipped from view. And at the time, Dan and I were making work, often in disused or derelict buildings. We were up to our necks in clay, we had our hands in seeds, we were growing, we were germinating, we were working with burnt wood, with red desert sand, with crystals. We were harnessing processes of organic and inorganic growth. And our work was very, very elemental. And we were working in the urban space, and in a way, we always felt that there was something very, very precarious about our place on this planet, that the instability that James E. Hansen had unleashed, that James Lovelock had spoken about in the Gaia, was there, was tangible, was haunting us. And yet it felt that our preoccupations were somehow at sharp odds with the rising artistic elite at the time. But something was happening. And over the last 15 years, there has been this growing movement, spreading like mycelium. We all know about it, we've all touched it. Subversive, underground at times, barely visible, occupying spaces, challenging orthodoxies, challenging corporations, creating struggle, putting up a fight, being arsey, being very, very difficult. And in a way, as Grayson Perry said in his Wreath Lectures, rather pithily, he said that the arguments between artists is no longer abstract expressionism versus surrealism. I won't try and do an impression of Grayson, by the way, don't worry. Or about video installationists against big photo peddlers. It was about the arguments, the debate, the cut was between the worthy environmentalist activist against the ironic market sellout. And, you know, to me, this brings to mind sort of oligarchs adorning their walls with must-have multi-million-dollar artworks, whilst young activists walk in to publicly owned, oil-sponsored gallery spaces and ripcord their skirts and unleash brown stuff all over the floor. I'm just going to go to my notes now. So this movement of art and culture, which I say has been growing like mycelium, has a broad reach across the artistic board between commentator. It's the artist as commentator, the artist as observer, as researcher, as innovator, as interventionist, as activist. This movement is without name, without acronym, yet it seeks to inform, to research, challenge, collaborate, provoke, activate, inspire, to rewire social and political change. Lucy Lippard, a brilliant, brilliant writer, art critic and activist, she describes how artists slip between the institutional walls to expose the layer of emotional and aesthetic resonance in our relationships to the world. She points out how the immensity of topics that we face require new spaces, new places for encounter, to be redefined to present a multiple set of views. The frame on life is being rapidly redrawn, and the need for multiple views is paramount. From direct action to activism to collaborative cross-disciplinary work. Across the globe, from Iceland to the United Arab Emirates, Australia to the Arctic, Antarctica, Kassel, Caracas to Constantinople, a multitude of artists, activists, academics, commissioners, curators, funders, galleries, institutions, and museums have seized the cultural ground opened up by climate change and by biodiversity devastation, revealing how artistic intent is rich and varied, a cultural diversity where ethics is laced into aesthetics. But this is work without borders, it's without boundaries. Artists are working with meteorologists. They're looking at food security. They're working with climate scientists, data analysis, biotechnology. There's no easy name for this movement that's happening. Artists are moving out, they're spreading out, and they're working in the most extreme, interesting, and extraordinary ways. Zoology, philosophy, ethics, politics, psychology, biotechnology. Artists are there and everywhere globally. So COP21 has been a defining moment. And no longer on the periphery or the margins, thousands of artists, activists, and collaborators in Paris, Europe, and across the world seized the center for cultural occupations that agitated and inspired and called for binding global resolution to counter climate change. The Paris Agreement throws humanity and multi-species a lifeline. There are lurking concerns that there will be those who seek to unravel. History shows us the merchants of doubt work in their wicked ways. They want to fray the commitment and tie the binding agreements, but we cannot let this happen. Art, I would say, is the thread that connects us here today, and culture is the exquisite, complex tapestry touched by millions of hands, and there is a shift which we all have a hand in making that seeks to place art, culture, imagination, creativity, and vision as to what the future may hold firmly into the realm of policy, politics, philosophy, reality, technology, and economics. We all want to shape the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for 5 really inspiring talks. I'll just quickly cover them, and then I think without much ado we'll throw it open to you guys, because I'm sure there are some questions. Nick, who threw down the gauntlet to us now in the spirit of brightness and optimism, but there is no room for complacency, that we've all got to get cracking now in every part of our lives immediately. That was a really strong throwing down of the gauntlet. Lola, who delightfully said that we're in front of a lot of the politicians, but that again is a huge challenge to us, that we need to engage, we really do need to engage with politicians and the political process. Darren, whose commitment to sustainability within an institution that many of us in this room will be directly engaged with, and showing how that's yielded a thriving arts sector, what more can be done. Patrick, I'm not sure how I can sum up what you said, but basically that this is actually, and I think all of us feel this is an existential challenge, much more than just dealing with one side of it, that actually it calls into question our very beings and our relationship to reality, and that need for arts to be involved in science and politics at every level, and policy making as a creative process is fascinating, and something that we really do need to think about. And finally, Heather, who talked about the way that art slips between all the other bits around it to expose our multiple capacities for being human beings, that art is everywhere, and it is the lifeline for Paris. Before I ask any specific questions, I'm just going to throw it open to the floor to find out if anybody here wants to ask any questions specifically. Any hands? Over there. Do we have a microphone? There's one there, actually. It'll go into the live stream.
Hi, thanks. Lola made a really interesting point about the fact that a lot of the arts are perceived as something for the sort of white middle classes,
Yeah.
sort of the elite liberati, I suppose. How can we take art and reach a wider audience? How can we actually get that to trickle down to perhaps the broader arts that the youth, perhaps people that don't see some of these more interesting arts, actually get out to those people as well?
Okay. Any other questions? Shall I take them in threes?
Community energy groups across the UK are working really hard to work with their local communities to develop renewable energy generation and energy efficiency projects embedded in their local communities to support the decentralized energy system. How do you think artists should be working with those groups?
Can you say who you are, actually?
I'm Chloe Uden from Regen Southwest.
Okay. And any other question before we show this back?
Hi, I'm Luke from Carbon Culture. Do the panel feel that at the moment there is existing infrastructure to tie all these things together, or is there some missing infrastructure that would allow these different pieces of culture, different pieces of economy, and commercial practice to fit together better than they do at the moment?
Okay, thank you. So we've got three questions. Lola, specifically for Lola, but I'd like to invite anybody to comment on it, about the prevailing dominant white middle-class culture of the environment movement, particularly in this country, and how we can interrupt that. Chloe asked a question about community energy groups and how the arts and cultural sector can relate to that. And Luke, a similar question, is there an infrastructure to bring all of this together? Lola, do you want to kick off, seeing as that was asked for you specifically, and then anybody else can go?
Sure, and I think actually, didn't you say, you mentioned the arts, you didn't say, or did I mishear you? Yeah, that's what I thought you said. Okay, so what I would say in response to that is that there are actually, the production of the arts is actually very diverse. It's not necessarily in what we sometimes call the mainstream, but there's lots of diversity in terms of people making music, making images, making clothing, whatever. That's all around. It is very difficult at the moment in terms of formal education, because we know that for various reasons the arts and I think the humanities have been downgraded in terms of higher education, certainly, but also in terms of national curriculum and so forth. But I think the point I would make is that, that there are lots of artists out there who can be engaged in this movement, but somehow they're not making the links. I don't know quite why that is. We've had that conversation before about how we can get some of those, particularly the young artists, but not exclusively, from these wider range of communities to engage with this issue of environmentalism. I think it's projected in a way that doesn't seem to connect with those people. I don't have any easy answers to that, but I think it can be done. And I think it's through the work. I mean, I think making work, people have a consciousness about their own area. So this is again where you would connect, in my view, up with social justice. So if I take, for example, you know, somewhere in North London or whatever, Northwest London, some of those areas where you get a lot of young people from African Caribbean heritage making music or making images and so on. How do you then get them, make that connection with them? They understand what's going on around them in terms of unemployment and other forms of, you know, stop and search and all of these other areas around social justice. So to me, environmental justice is a big part of their lives, only they don't necessarily know that and recognize it.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Darren?
I would just say from an Arts Council point of view that diversity is absolutely key to our investment strategy going forward. So and by diversity, people from BME backgrounds, people with disabilities, and people from tougher socioeconomic backgrounds. Really, really important areas. We want to make sure that we're commissioning art and culture for people and from people that are representative of the whole of England, the way England looks and feels in the 21st century, and that's absolutely important to us. And some of the things around around actually geographical spread as well. And we want to see centres of creative excellence and production right around the country. So programs like our Creative People and Places programme, which takes 21 areas of low engagement in arts and culture, and we continue to invest in that. And that's something that for our next investment round, we will see as more and more important. So we absolutely don't believe it's good enough at the moment. We want to get better at it.
Darren, can I just quickly ask you, then how will you make the link between the progress that you're making in environmental issues and the progress that you're trying to make in diversity? Because that's the point, is how do we bring those areas together?
I think it's a good question. I think one of the things is maybe in the past these things have not been seen as central to the mainstream. We see these as absolutely central parts of our investment strategy going forward. It's not an optional bolt-on that certain people who have particular interests have a choice to do. It's actually a responsibility for everybody across the arts and culture sector to take part in.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nick, you want to...
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it depends a little bit on the country that you're in. I mean, if you're in parts of the world where you're actually feeling the climatic impacts right now, if you're in some of the small islands, parts of Africa, California, for example, where they've had long-standing droughts and they're losing their ice caps in the Sierra Nevada mountains. When you're in parts of the world like that, you see much more of the arts coming forward. It seems in Britain that we only tend to get very excited about climate change directly in sense of feeling it when there are floods. But the rest of it, nice hot summer, all very happy. So maybe, and the problem with environmental issues these days is, with a lot of the pollution, it's invisible, right? So, I mean, you know, we remember 100 years or so ago when little boys used to throw matches onto canals in the north of England and they would see flames go pouring down the canal because of all the shit coming out of the water and fumes and methane. So it's a much more challenge of the imagination if you're not feeling the impacts of environmental change at your doorstep right now. Because you wake up in the morning and it's like, well, it's like 4 degrees, and then in the afternoon it's 16 degrees. And why is that guy Nick Nuttall saying we should be worried about a 2-degree centigrade rise by the end of the century? So, you know, it's actually a failure of imagination, I think. You know, tasting, feeling it is very different. On the issue of the ethnic involvement, maybe not directly with the arts or whatever, but, you know, there are some countries around this world, and quite a lot of them are in Paris, that realize the future is, you know, dealing with environmental change, and the opportunities are in terms of jobs. And I don't know what other issue is more compelling to the youth of these days and how they're going to get work, is that actually, most people maybe don't know in this room, maybe some people do, there are now more people employed in renewable energy than the oil and gas industry. So whose jobs are at risk if we don't actually act on climate change? So, I mean, I think maybe people haven't fully engaged in what this thing, the environment, is about, and what climate change is about. And getting back to your point, the interesting stuff about philosophy and adaptation, I mean, there are avenues here of research for artists. Like, why is it that people that suffer natural disasters are more likely to not believe in climate change? Because once they've rebuilt their communities, they cannot believe that they're going to be destroyed again. These are big intellectual and philosophical and emotional and existential emotions. Why do pregnant women who have babies think that there's less climate change going on? Because they cannot imagine that their child will have a worse future than they've had. These are very interesting topics which are not being explored by many artists yet.
Yeah. Heather, did you want to say something? We've got 5 more minutes. No. Okay, we've got time for one more question. Judith Knight.
It seems impossible that the arts can really engage in this issue while some organisations are still taking sponsorship from oil companies. Heather mentioned the protests at the Tate, and now the Tate and Edinburgh Festival have stopped that. What can we do to persuade other arts organisations, museums, to do likewise?
Does anybody want to kick off with that? So what Judith asked was, she's brought up, as of course she would, the issue of oil sponsorship in the arts, particularly in the light of what's happened with the Tate Edinburgh International Festival and the report out yesterday around BP.
Well, I mean, I think, it works on many, many levels, and, you know, and I think even though Tate may not have said that their special relationship with BP has now stopped because of the activism, you know, I think that's slightly ungenerous. I think they could have a bit of generosity and say, listen, guys, you've done some amazing art, actually. They've done some great stuff. I mean, arriving with a huge with a huge blade of a wind turbine. Liberate Tate, art not oil. They're strong, they're robust, they're resilient. They have lots and lots of young people involved. It's very inclusive. I think it moves across the boards. And they're just turning attention now to other institutions that, that are taking the money. And I think the thumbscrews are going on. I think now that Tate has stopped, for whatever reasons, that sends a big signal. I think what the South Bank did by stepping back from Shell was great. So it needs to be amplified. Taking these moments here to sit in a panel and to say, yeah, we need to cut the cords that bind us as quick as we can. And there are other ways. We just need to put our heads together and wrestle it out, But it's not impossible. It's not possible.
Thank you. Nick, you wanted to say something
so
else?
if we are going to deal with climate change and we are going to deal with environmental sustainability, we need the oil companies and the coal companies to change what they do. Fossil fuels are going to be with us for a long time. It's about the mix. And I think there's enough information now built in the hands of anybody that wants it, from carbon disclosure projects to many other things, that will give you some idea whether that oil company is walking the talk, does want to change or not. So I don't think it's about ban all oil companies or ban all fossil fuel companies. It's about, are you actually investing and supporting a company that is genuinely committed to change? And some are not.
Thank you. I think that's all, sadly, we've got time for. So I'd like to just thank the panel, but also to remind us that this is very much an invitation from all of these people, artists as well as people from outside the arts and the world of arts and culture, to actually talk to them and to start to talk up. And to be involved in the policy conversations and the strategy development as it happens. So just to say thank you very much to Heather Ackroyd, Patrick De George, Darren Henley, Lola Young, and Nick Nuttall. We've now got, I think there's a short break, and then there are sessions, panel sessions. They are. Sorry, I should know this.
I remember Baroness Youngerville.
Yeah.
So, just in case you haven't got your agendas handy, let's make it a 10-minute break. I know that's really short, but there's so many amazing speakers to come. There will be 4 sessions that follow the break. In here, we're going to have 2 sessions. The first is Changing the Narrative, New Norms, and it will be followed by Changing the Narrative, Institutions as Transition. There is another breakout space as well, and there'll be 2 fascinating discussions there as well. Can the team who are helping out just raise your hands and wave? They will direct you, take a look, these are the faces you're looking for. They will direct you to the room upstairs, which is called K128, and there we'll have a conversation about energy, culture, and ethics right after the break. And after that, there'll be a brilliant conversation called A New Economy, Redesigning Systems, about the opportunities of the circular economy. And they'll be back to back in that space. If you need any help, just grab one of us and have a quick cup of tea before we move on. And please do thank our wonderful panel again. Welcome back on the live stream. I hope you're still with us. Keep tweeting at #Coptimism. If you're going to hang around and take teas and drinks, please do so a little more quietly. And I'll hand over now to the chair of this session, Alex McIntosh.
I'm going to stay in my seat to set the tone for this session. I think we're going to try and be maybe relatively informal, but just give you a brief introduction as to why we're here. Thank you all for joining this session. It's great to have you here. We are here to talk about changing the narrative, or in fact creating new norms. So how can we make this agenda around climate change something that feels normal and part of our lives, something that we all take into account on a daily basis? I mean, in very simple terms, culture and creativity, and I'm reading now, they shape our material and conceptual worlds. The role of artists and creative businesses in provoking and mainstreaming new ideas and sustainable behaviors and reflecting on how we feel about the natural world are unsurpassed. So the question really is, how can and how should creatives leverage their influence to see the change that we need? I won't say too much about the panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves, but I will just say who each of them are. At the end of it here, we have Tim Lindsay, who is the CEO of D&AD. Next to him, we have Matt Black from Cold Cut and Ninja Tunes. Debbie Manus is the CEO of Keo Films. And then Rachel, who is a poet. Needs no further introduction. I think that what I want to just say before that I hand over to each of them is that what we have here is a kind of, I think, a diverse range of people from different parts of the creative industries. I myself am Alex McIntosh. I am part of a research centre at London College of Fashion called Centre for Sustainable Fashion, so I guess the clue is in the name. The work we do, obviously, is looking at how fashion in all its various different forms can help to move us towards a better world and better lives for everybody involved in that industry. And on that note, I will hand over to Tim to tell us a little bit about his work.
Thank you for choosing me first. I'm Tim Lindsay. I'm CEO of D&AD. I spent my career in advertising and as such feel as if I've slightly come into the lion's den. But I've repented. And D&AD is a creative education charity. Our main sources of income are running a global advertising and design awards show in the belief that the good stuff has better outcomes than the bad stuff. Commercially, certainly, socially, culturally, and even in terms of the environment. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Up until now, it was enough to encourage excellence in creativity in advertising and design. But the game's changed. It isn't enough for advertising in particular, and advertising is less thoughtful than the design industry about these things, to simply encourage people to buy stuff they don't need, often with money they don't have, to impress people that don't give a shit, which is one way of defining the advertising industry. So a couple of things have happened, and just let me mention them. Hopefully they're interesting. One is that big companies have begun to understand that doing the right thing is quite often the right thing to do commercially, led by companies like Unilever, who are serious about growth, admittedly, but sustainable growth. And the advertising industry has fallen behind in leading this discussion with its clients. It's failed, really, to develop the language, the strategy tools, the metrics, the understanding to lead clients, to help them understand how to put purpose, if not beyond profit, certainly alongside profit. There's nothing new in this. I mean, Lord Leverhulme believed that you could do well by doing good and built Port Sunlight back in the 19th century. But increasingly, this thinking is becoming mainstream in marketing and business terms. There's another factor as well, which is that there's a sort of talent brain drain, particularly amongst creative people, away from the advertising and design industries, because they're looked at slightly askance by millennials, if we're still allowed to call them that, and people emerging from arts universities, other places, look at the advertising business and go, I'm not sure I want to be part of that. It seems to lack a moral compass. So the people who we need to recruit in order to work in this business are looking elsewhere for their creative fulfillment, which is a bad thing. So D&AD, as I say, we run a big award show, started something called the White Pencil 4 years ago, and it is for creativity that seeks to do well by doing good. It's meant to be about demonstrating the power of commercial creativity to be a force for good in the world. And it's the most important thing we do, in my estimation, and we talk about it a lot. It's grown fantastically, which is encouraging when you think about it. And we've just broken it off, and we're going to give it its own time and place and name and run it in September in New York, still a global show. The whole point of this is to encourage a point where the commercial agenda and the sustainability agenda intersect. Because once companies start doing the right thing by consumers and their suppliers and employees and so on, it kind of doesn't matter what the motivation is, we'll be beginning to move, in our humble opinion, in the right direction. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Great, lovely. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Black. I'm part of a group called Cold Cut, and we started a label called Ninja Tune 25 years ago. And I guess from the beginning, I was interested in music having some content to it, music and art having some content and that meaning something. I listened to a lot of great black music when I was at college with my mates. That was a very formative time. People like Gil Scott-Heron, James Brown, and those messages did seep in and they became part of what I believe. I guess I felt that there was something there that was real and that spoke about the world, could look at the world and see there was a lot wrong with it, and this art and this music commentated on it, and it was powerful and inspiring, and I guess that is something which we want to carry on and keep doing. So our label is sort of proudly independent. I think we sort of took a slight anti-corporate independent stance from the beginning, looking at the way that corporations often act in this sort of clumsy and greedy way. We wanted to do something different from that. And we've attracted some artists to the label that share those ideas and I think also want to have some messages and meaning in their music. Music can often just be, especially dance music, which is kind of where we come from, can just be about having, you know, funky noise and a heavy beat and people dancing, and whilst it's all very nice for us to get together, one nation under a groove, it doesn't necessarily make that much of a change. So artists like Kate Tempest, who we've signed a couple of years ago, is a particular favourite of mine, also Young Fathers, who shot into the spotlight recently, they are people who believe in the power of music and the power of the individual to change things. And so I'm very happy to have artists like that on the label. Throwing Shade is another new signing that we've made, who's also politically outspoken and articulate. So we're talking about how can and should creatives leverage their public influence. A couple of observations on that, perhaps. We've acknowledged that the power of the artist to reach an audience. And I thought the introductory talks here today were very inspiring and put that very well. One thing, though, is that does create a power imbalance because it's one way. It's a bit like a broadcast. So there is a responsibility for creatives to be thoughtful and to be genuine in the messages that we're putting out. Otherwise, and there's a question earlier about why perhaps ethnic communities are not perhaps touched by these messages sometimes, but maybe they can perceive that they haven't really been put in forms which are appropriate for them. Maybe they perceive that there sometimes can be a lack of integrity. I think people are very sensitive to when a person who benefits from publicity is putting out a message. Maybe there's a suspicion that the reason they're doing that is more to boost their own profile than in the message that they're putting out. And that does happen. And you know, whilst of course it's very difficult for any of us to be completely sure about what our motivations are, what is the boundary between our beliefs and what our ethics and our ego, we have to really look at that and make sure that what we're manifesting actually is straight up and has integrity. And we have to be thoughtful about the way that we do things. And I think actually that's the main point that I'd like to make today, is that we need to have a unified strategy amongst the community that we've got that share the interest and realize and prioritize the situation, that want to make a change with regard to climate, the environment, inequality, or whatever. We have to get the messages straight. We have to be coherent, and we have to design those messages properly. Now, the opposition, I don't always like to think in us and them terms, but you know, the oil industry is an opposition, and they put their messages very powerfully all the time, and they've been doing that for many years, and that's a large reason why it's been such a humongous task to shift people's opinions about it and make a change. We also have to be intelligent and creative and design our messages very carefully, and we also have to make sure that we've got a unified voice. I think sometimes there's been a problem with people in the community who do have platforms making quite out there, unsupported, exaggerated, or downright irrational statements with the best motivation in the world, but it can come out rather shrill and it can turn people off. I think we need to concentrate on having more unity and coherency in what creatives generate if we're really going to be effective. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Debbie.
I'm just going to show a clip first, if I can.
Can I just talk to you for a couple of minutes about your shopping? Yeah? Okay, so 16% of the food we take home we throw away. Do you recognize yourself in that statistic? A little bit. Do you throw some of your food away?
Yeah.
Like when it goes past its sell-by date?
Yes. Yeah.
To save you the trouble of taking it home,
Go on.
I thought we could throw some of your food away right here.
Right.
So for example, have you by any chance got any carrots here today?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
a quarter of all the carrots we buy are thrown away at home. So can we start by binning one of your carrots?
Go on, why not?
Thank you very much.
Make one of my carrots.
2.5 kilos of potatoes. Quarter of all of them. But you're going to throw them away anyway. That seems fair, doesn't it? One more for luck. Have you got a salad?
You can't open that.
I'm really sorry. Look, a third of all our boxed and bagged salads, a third of them get chucked away.
Why did you pick on me?
Terrific start. Yeah, we throw away a surprising...
So that's by way of an introduction to Keo, and also probably why we're here today. Keo is a television company, although we're called Keo Films, sometimes confusing, that makes all sorts of programs, a wide variety of factual programs, but it was started 20 years ago by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, who you saw in the clip there, and a couple of other guys, a cameraman and an editor. And Hugh always had an interest in sustainability. As you probably know, the very first show that Keo was successful with was River Cottage. And they made River Cottage, which was Hugh essentially leaving London, moving into the country to see if he could live off the land. And it was an entertaining and very funny lifestyle show for Channel 4. And of course, typical creatives, after the first series was really successful, Channel 4 said, oh, can we have another series, please? And our creative director said, oh, no, we've done it all now. We've told the whole story, there's nothing more to show. And Channel 4 said, oh, just do the same thing again. It's fine, just do it again. 17 years later, we finally stopped making River Cottage, so doing kind of the same thing for 17 years. So I think that's why Keo has ended up doing a number of television programs that sort of sit in the environmental, sustainable, kind of ethical space. But we're a commercial TV company, and we're talking to an audience who need to be entertained. That's what we do. We make shows that the broadcasters can show and that bring a big audience. So the stories we tell have to be simple and they have to be entertaining. And I think that's very much where I'm coming from. I have to admit, I don't know a huge amount about climate change, like most of the audience. but I want to make a difference, and I think the best way that we can make a difference is by putting entertaining television on the television channels and show people how they can make a difference. And that show, Waste, was on BBC One before Christmas. I don't know if any of you saw it, Hugh's War on Waste. And it follows a tradition we have of doing campaigning shows with Hugh. We made Fish Fight for Channel 4 as well. And you know, what are lots of the things we do in that, stunts and all of that kind of thing, make it a very entertaining show and a very accessible show to the audience. And that show peaked at 5 million on BBC One, and I think that's an amazing example of how you can get out what you're trying to say in a very simple and exciting and entertaining way. As it happens, Keo's also done a number of other things sort of over the 20 years that kind of sit slightly alongside the television production, and have, in some ways, we've had to kind of section it off. We started a website called People Fund It that's now Crowdfunder. You probably know that sort of specifically encourages people to crowdfund for ethical businesses. We also started something called I'm now going to, for some reason my mind's gone completely blank. Landshare, that's right, which was a website for people to share land if they've got land they weren't using, for people who wanted to grow vegetables, etc., etc. But these things have proved to be things that are very difficult to make money out of, but we still think they're important, so we've kind of siphoned them off and put them into their own little kind of non-profit-making vehicle. So that's where I'm coming from, very lowbrow, but hopefully I think, you know, we're in a position where we can really make a difference, and that's why I'm interested in being here today.
Very good, thank you very much. Rachel?
Hello. So I am a poet, which usually means being in bed, kind of laptop on belly for the whole day, and writing. And I write a lot about my best friend Tiff, because she's fascinating, my mum and dad, because they're fascinating in their own ways. Their messed up relationship is, you know, just collections long. I facilitate as well when I actually do get up and out. I work a lot in schools across all ages, libraries, with community groups, so people with dementia, or women who have suffered domestic abuse or have had their children taken into care, and working a lot with young poets as well. And I set up a group for women of colour poets at the South Bank Centre back in September, because I felt that, especially within poetry, there wasn't really a space where kind of what you wanted to write about, which is what you kind of wanted to write about, was always challenged or came up against a lot of opposition, sometimes in more formal institutional educational settings. So from where I did my MA, and if you take a kind of even a crude cross-section of who does literature MAs in the country, usually you are only the person of colour there, which is fine, but when you don't, when you're writing about something that actually no one else in the room can maybe understand, and then beyond that are maybe a little bit hostile about it as well, not all the time, but sometimes. And so I knew a lot of brilliant young women of colour poets, and we'd had conversations, and they'd said similar things as well. So I was like, okay, let's get a space and a room, and we can sit and write and share and support each other. And also, when actually, so I went to the South Bank Centre, and they were stunning, and they were like, yes, sure, this needs to happen. And it was only on the telephone to Alison, when being invited to be on this panel, that, and at first, maybe a little bit like you, I was a bit like, oh, I don't know, because I don't know how much I know about climate change. But Alison said something that was really interesting. She said that how through the project that is Octavia through setting up that workshop for women of colour at somewhere especially like the South Bank Centre as well, with its kind of literary prestige and how big it is as a centre for arts, how that is changing the climate, so to speak, the literature climate. Obviously I was like, yes. Thought about that the whole time. And when we're kind of left to our own devices and there's not like a guy's voice constantly just being like, well, I think this, or someone tells you a story about when they last went to Africa, even though half of us have not even been ourselves, we write beyond, you know, we don't just write about exotic fruits or spices or kind of mum's recipes and stuff like that. It's kind of a lot wider. It is about writing about your environment and the way, the unique way you see the world. And in those ways, I think there is a link between what I do when I get out of bed and being here and the things that we're here to do and want to do today. Also, there's just, as I did say I was going to be really quick, and now I've started like. Also, there's something as well in poetry, the kind of poetry that I like and the poets that I admire don't try and kind of force something down your throat. You know, we're not preachers. We're not there to kind of, even though some people do, it's really bad. You have to sit through a lot of poetry nights where someone's trying, which I don't think in any setting that is effective, really, or you are preaching to the converted sometimes. So I think the ways that we write about climate change and the ways that we write about our own environments, even if that is home, even if that's even a smaller macrocosm, even if that is right about your mum and dad, how once you write that small, and I think that's what poetry is. Oh, sorry. What poetry is, you're kind of looking at something on a microscopic level, and how then it's left to your audience or to your reader to make it bigger, to let it kind of make its way into them and make up their own minds about what they want to do thereafter with what you have presented to them or made them look at in a slightly different way.
Thank you, Rachel. Fantastic. I think that I just had going around in my head, actually, when you were speaking then, something Deborah said right at the beginning about the power artists have to bypass your head and go straight to your heart. And that maybe that's the first question we should just talk about, is actually, are we reaching the heart of young creatives? Are we, with this particular agenda or issue, is it kind of, how can we support the industries we're all part of to be talking about this, to be actually making it part of their dialogue? Anyone got any answers on that? Tim, maybe I'll start with you, because you obviously do quite a lot of work supporting young creatives.
Advertising is a funny thing because it's paid for by clients who spend money to grow their businesses, brands and businesses. But it has a lot of fantastically talented people in it, amongst them people who self-describe as creative people, designers, technologists, writers, art directors. And they, I think, are increasingly beginning to feel, first, as I said, that they want some purpose in their professional lives. They just don't want to spend 100% of their time, more like 150 actually, selling stuff in a world where resources are limited and Earth Overshoot Day is on August the 10th or whenever it is this year. At the same time, they have mortgages to pay and families to support. And so increasingly, that's a drive for these things to be on the agenda, but it will only really be enacted by big corporations who, are powerful, and when they see this, as I say, this convergence of the commercial and the sustainability agenda. And I'm optimistic about it. We do see it happening. I mean, D&AD is a small organisation, but we've already had an impact, I think, in moving this whole conversation forward and the development of practical, as I said, practical tools that will help agencies make this happen with their clients. I haven't explained it very well, I feel, but if you, and it's growing, and it is, again, in my humble opinion, it's not the only hope for the future, but if corporations don't do the right thing, then we're all in big trouble. And so they have to be encouraged to do the right thing. And that has to become the right thing to do. And they have to be held to account and all that stuff that, has been discussed today.
You've talked about doing the right thing and the good thing. Without wanting to put you on the spot, do you have any examples or exemplars you feel really sort of...
I do actually, and it's a Unilever example. It's a brand called Lifebuoy, which is a toilet soap sold in the developing world. And to enact this sort of putting purpose alongside profit, they gave the brand the ambition of eradicating infant mortality in Indian villages. And they're serious about it. They spend proper money on it, and they support it with other programs. And the brand has grown by 15% odd year on year in the last... So it satisfies shareholders. I mean, these companies haven't become philanthropists overnight. They have boards and shareholders. But it is also, successfully doing something that is about much more than profit. And there are lots of examples like that. Not enough, by the way. And what our white pencil attempts to do is gather those, encourage it, provide examples for companies to, take it further.
Great. And one of the things I've noticed working with a lot of fashion businesses and running a fashion business myself is that many young people, and I don't count myself as one of those, but many people have an engagement with these things on a personal level, but when it comes to walking through the door at work, it just disappears, and it's just not there. And I kind of think, how can we get people to take those personal values and bring them into the workplace? And Debbie or Matt, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of...
I think people should get more angry, actually, especially the youth, because it's them that's having their future sold off. A lot of the old guard, probably including me, will have shuffled off by the time climate change were to really hit. So it's their future that's being sold off, and they should be really angry about that. And one's taught perhaps that anger is a very destructive and negative thing. Well, it is powerful stuff, but you have to be careful with it. But it also is an energy and a fuel. And I think that a lot of positive change that has happened in human history has in fact been fueled by anger against people speaking out and acting out against what is wrong. So, the positive ways in which artists can contribute, we're discussing those, and I think they're quite obvious, but I haven't heard it actually put that if I was a young creative, or even as a creative person, I don't want to put my creative powers at the service of businesses which are preying on the environment and on humanity. And people should realize that, if you're doing that, you're getting paid to fiddle while Rome burns, or worse, actually, you're helping orchestrate that destruction. So, yeah, I think people should get angry, and they should understand what their beliefs are and that they are powerful. And as you say, when they walk through that door into whatever job they've got, maybe they can apply that to what they do or the type of companies that they work with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Debbie, you're obviously your work is clearly very engaged with actually delivering quite a lot of factual information to people about, and how much have you seen, particularly, let's say, if we're talking about young people reacting to this kind of information being put out into the media space?
Really positively, actually. I was, and I think it's because part of it is because we do it in an entertaining way, but part of it is also because you're giving people a real role and you're engaging them. So the things and that works both for people coming into the office as well as the people that we're engaging with in the general population. So Fish Fight and War on Waste are really good examples where we have a big digital campaign going alongside the television, and we ask people to sign up and we ask people to do something about it, and we try and get them to change the way they behave. In the office, it was really funny actually when we were doing War on Waste, because all of a sudden we thought, shit, what if the Daily Mail comes in and goes through our bins and we're making this show for BBC One? So, and because it is very easy in the office to be thinking all the time about cost and not, because unfortunately, of course, it's always more expensive to do the right thing. So anyway, we've now got a very good recycling system in our office, you'll be pleased to hear. But so actually, just in the work that we do, because we have to constantly be aware of what public image we've got as well as internal image, that's made us very very careful. And we do, I mean, what you were saying about creatives, encouraging creatives to think about these things, I think in my experience, people love the fact that we have this extra layer in our company of kind of ethical and issue-based kind of place. And as a result, we're a very, very popular production company. You know, everybody wants to work for us. So I think encouraging people isn't difficult to take up these things as long as they, you know, they can really engage with it, I suppose.
Yeah, my experience is similar. People are always very, very interested. The problem is exactly what you just said, is the cost versus the kind of
It's
ethics.
not always more expensive to do the right thing.
No, I know. It does feel like it.
I know what you mean,
Yeah, can you give us an example of when it hasn't been for you?
Well, I remember, you know, getting to know Julie's and I think Alison telling me that, you know, they'd gone to a bunch of festival companies and they'd pointed out that they were wasting a lot of electricity by having these rubbish old refrigerators, which were very inefficient. So they got in new fridges, which are a lot more efficient, and I think the festival companies sort of got their money back in half a season on their investment in the new fridges by the amount of electricity they were saving. So they saved money, they're going on saving money. The right thing was actually the profitable thing as well.
Yeah, great. And just going back to Matt's point about feeling angry, how do you feel about that, Rachel, in terms of young people and needing... You're definitely the youngest person on this panel. So how do you feel about the idea that we all need to be, maybe all of us, but certainly the younger generation expressing more?
Yeah, I agree. Audre Lorde has got very famous Black American feminist. Has got a whole essay on anger and its uses, and I think we're always kind of shamed for being angry, feeling angry. There's always kind of made to think that it's not pretty to be angry, and there are more effective ways of getting something across. Which I think there are to a certain point, but then after that, and no one's still listening, it does become, I think, the most effective way, and maybe the only way that we will be listened to as people, young or old or... yeah, definitely. I'm angry. I encourage anger.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference with righteous anger as well, isn't there? So you're just not kicking off about something that doesn't really matter, or that you're selfish.
Do you think maybe we need to that kind of righteous anger that maybe many people feel about their localized, you know, the things that surround them on a local level, we need to kind of try and engage on a kind of global community level, because this is obviously a shared issue that we are all going to be facing over the next however many years, or in fact the next 5 years, to get to what we were talking about earlier of halting emissions or stabilizing emissions by 2020. So how do we get people to transfer that maybe very personal kind of sense of into that maybe more collective? Yeah, go.
Well, John Lennon said that an artist doesn't make anything up, they just channel what a lot of people are thinking. And you could say that a sort of a prophet is the person in the audience who starts clapping at the right time, or the salt crystal that you drop into the salt solution, which makes it all crystallize out. So when there is feeling, there is widespread feeling in a lot of people, and yet it hasn't perhaps crystallized. Now we're in the moment of crystallization, and that is a moment when one feels in contact with all the other people that share this consciousness. Yeah. So that's a very good thing to encourage. And back to what I was saying about we need to link up all the people that share these ideas, find out, concentrate on what we have in common, actually, rather than you and I might disagree about whether flying is bad or not. Do you know what I mean? But we can agree on a lot of other important stuff. That's what we should concentrate on. We chart out what that territory of commonality is, and then, you know, more and more people will, I think, collect around that, and we should use that to then have a unified voice and message which is effective, more as a block, as a whole.
Couldn't agree more. Territory of commonality, we should take that and add that into the Climate Coalition idea. Okay, I'm gonna turn over to someone right at the back. Question there. I'm not going to take it in threes. I'm going to take it one at a time. Sorry, Renee, that you have to run with the mic.
Hi, my name's Sophie Thomas. I run a design studio called Thomas Matthews for the last 20 years. We do communication design and sustainability, but I've also been heading up Great Recovery Project at the RSA for the last 4 years looking at circular economy, which is I'm about to talk upstairs, so I'm going to be quick. It was really to Tim, because actually I have judged white pencil a couple of years back, and it was an amazing experience. I mean, we, and Naresh is here as well, we had a very incredible couple of days, but I also had the most depressing time as well, because I also went into black pencil and helped. So if people that don't know, when you judge a white pencil, it then goes into the pool, potentially, to get the ultimate prize for the pencil. So on one level, there was an amazing amount of understanding of the potential of sustainability in advertising in my industry and design. But on the other hand, it just hit this block of traditionalism and advertising. And I absolutely hear you that this particular industry, and I think it's quite common in a lot of creative industries, that we just don't have the language for sustainability, or we don't know how to talk about it to the other sectors or other policymakers or, the manufacturers, etc. So the question really is, you say you've been working with people like Unilever. Are you actually working with those that are writing the briefs in the first place? Because a lot of this is to do with the empowerment of designers and creatives, but also we are a service industry at some level, not like artists, but we have to deliver on a brief. So are you working with these guys to bring it into the brief?
I mean, it's a really good question. It's quite a sort of technical advertising and communications question, because the thinking has to start at the thinking stage as opposed to the execution stage. So the answer is yes, we have worked with strategists and a sort of coalition of the willing to, as I said, to invent the language and the thinking and the processes and the tools at the beginning. And but I certainly don't want to come across as an apologist for advertising. What you experienced is the reality of the business. It's beginning to change in some places, but most of it isn't. And we're much nearer the beginning of this journey than the end. I mean, what I would say, partly in reply to what Matt said, is that advertising, the whole communications industry, possesses enormously powerful weapons. And what they're good at, what we're good at, is getting people to change their minds and their behavior, which is kind of what's required here. Unfortunately, most of that power is being devoted to get people to buy brand B rather than brand A, but it is changing, and DND and many other bodies like the RSA are helping it to change. Not fast enough, but beginning to happen. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah, just here in the right-hand block. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ben Twist from Creative Carbon Scotland, which is a slightly similar organisation to Julie's Bicycle, but in Scotland. And I think that last question was really pertinent, because what I often find myself thinking is that we don't know where we should be focusing our energies. And individuals often lack agency. There's not much that they can do to change things, although we need to change individuals' minds, and there's a whole series of behavior change questions around that. But the structures that you're talking about, I think, Tim, and that you were talking about at the back, are also really important. And I wonder whether we need to think more about where we focus that anger and who we're seeking to get to change. Because the people with their hands on the levers of power, and we've seen this with Arts Council England and indeed Creative Scotland and some of the others who have spoken today, or we can think about, they have the power to shift things by putting those structures in place. And I wonder whether we need to focus more on where we direct our anger rather than just, we've got to do lots.
Very fair point. Does anyone want to respond to that? Quite a tricky one. Just to clarify the question, are you actually asking us where we think the sort of anger, if that's what we're talking about, should be directed?
I think I'm saying that we ought to redirect it rather than asking, but if there's any comments, I'd glad to hear it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's something in this idea of the institutions, which we'll probably come on to in the next panel, actually, but what institutions can do both to facilitate but also to block the change that maybe needs to happen. And really is maybe back to the point about the white pencil, black pencil thing, is the will genuinely there to kind of create this change at the moment? Do you think that it is? Or is there actually quite a big school that is possibly standing in opposition to it?
I don't want to take up more than my share of our time. I believe changes are happening in the broader business community. Not fast enough, not in as many places as they should be, but I think, and to me, I'm sort of a practical person. Getting those two things hooked together is not the only solution, but it's a big part of the overall solution. I don't think you can take the profit motive away and disallow it. I think you have to harness it and go with it. I think
so
that's
maybe conscious capitalism.
Sort of, yes.
About.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Front row.
Hi, my name's Glenn. I'm from an art collective called Liberate Tate. And I just wanted to ask along the lines that we've sought to disrupt the mainstream by way of the different institutions getting BP out of Tate. And it's something that you haven't spoken to that much, but clearly there's a lot to be done in disrupting the advertising industry itself. The music industry, whether it be food waste or not, is not necessarily taking ideas into the mainstream, but confronting the mainstream to be different. I mean, we wanted to turn BP's advertising into a massive amplifier for what was really happening with BP and climate change. And I just wondered if there's anything that the panel could speak to about. I don't think we're short of, as the other questioner said, of what needs to change. I think you speak to the environmental community, the scientists and so on. We're absolutely not short of that, but what we are short of is channeling the energy into creative disruption. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing just from our perspective. I mean, there are so many ways, anger is one thing, then there are other kinds of ways of thinking about things, which is maybe just repositioning the way people experience a particular industry. So in fashion, we have one particular member of the centre that I'm part of at London College of Fashion who's really trying to address the issue of fashion enjoyment coming from consumption as opposed to from use, which is effectively where we are. The main enjoyment comes from the process of transaction, not the actual enjoyment of the thing itself. And I think that's a kind of quiet and it's not a kind of noisy thing, it's quite a quiet thing, but I think it's important that we maybe do think in lots of different ways about how we can be activists, not just holding up banners, not that I'm saying anyone is just holding up banners, but that maybe there are kind of things we can do that are stealthy, that get into those industries and do disrupt them without them maybe even knowing. I don't know about anyone else's thoughts on that.
There's something, talking about your own individual agency, so the money in poetry is slim. So a lot of the ways that you make your money is through commissions. So being approached by certain companies who you perhaps don't share their views or politics. So using your own agency to say no, even when that will hurt, maybe like rent won't get paid, and how much of a sacrifice that is, but knowing that if you do that for the money, I won't sleep well. So in those ways we can use our own individual agency, and also giving them the reason why in a very polite way. Never email me again. But this is why I cannot do this for you. So in those ways we can.
Yeah. Matt.
So Ninja Tune have employed an activist consultant called Richard Dent, a friend of mine, and he's working with us now because Ninja recognised that we wanted to be more politically and socially engaged. Everyone at Ninja works pretty flat out, so we needed to get someone who could actually devote some time to had some expertise. So I think that's an example of, as a company, we're actually prioritising what we believe in, and we're making a space in our business for that. Even though it's a cost and there's not necessarily a clear profit output from it, we think it's important enough to do. So, Rich and I talked about ideas for this panel, and the message, I've got a message to deliver, and it is this, that we need to have a unified message, and we need to design those messages. So that needs to come from a focused, expert effort to find the right message and the right way to put it across. So let's talk about some concrete things we should be doing. I think that's a concrete thing, and I think that Julie's Bicycle are organising an effort to do that, and that's going to be part of what we launch this evening, so we're really happy to support that. We need to hold the government to account on the Cop21 agreement. You know, the governments do tend to try and slide out of things. We need something, a single campaign like the Big Ask or Make Poverty History. So that's something concrete that we should support as well. And you know, a mainstream policy lobbying campaign, that it could be that. The Guardian divestment campaign a while ago was pretty effective. Something like that we can support as well. So again, I'd say let's decide what our message is, what our priorities are, get the message, detail it out using expert design and deliver it. Everything is advertising, actually. You know, we all advertise.
You use the word campaign a lot.
Exactly. You know, actually, I go further. It's propaganda. Yeah. You know, advertising propaganda. They tend to have negative.
Right? Or education.
Yeah, but you know, let's grasp the nettle and realise that actually we do want to change people's behaviour, our own behaviour, and other people, and that we're going to use all the tools that we can think of creatively to do that.
Effectively. Just, I know it says wrap. Really quick, we had Greenpeace to give a D&AD lecture a couple of months ago, and they very proudly said that a lot of the techniques they use in their campaigns are borrowed straight from, you know, commercial advertising and marketing. Thank God, you know, and how they're, you know, pretty effective. Sorry.
Okay, no, super. I think just to your point about propaganda, it springs to mind the quote from a 1930s, I think, philosopher called Martin Buber, who said, "The battle is not between East and West, it's between education and propaganda." Maybe that is something to think about. Okay, I think we need to wrap up now. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'm sorry if we didn't manage to answer everyone's questions, but hopefully there'll be more opportunities to ask in the following sessions. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists.
Well done. Good stuff.
Thank you so much to all of you and to the panel. Again, it's a quick fire afternoon, so please stay where you are if the session you're looking for next is institutions as transition. But if you want to connect with Sophie Thomas, who you heard a question from, and find out more about the circular economy and how designers are redesigning the systems we work in, head on upstairs. And again, if you need directions, it's just out of this room and all the way down along the corridor, and you'll see a sign. Otherwise, stay put.
Starts. So this session is called Institutions as Transition. So we heard in the last really good session there about how some creative individuals can really make a big impact. There was a few challenges laid down as to what the big institutions can do. So when we're talking about institutions here, we're talking institutions in the broadest sense. Institution might be a bit of a misleading word. So you can just think about big organizations, anything that's bigger than the individual. So that could be charities, businesses, corporations, public bodies, funding bodies, government bodies, etc. I'm from the BBC. My name is Adrian Ruth. I've been at the BBC for about 10 years, mostly in strategy. My day job is Director of Sustainability and Spark. Spark is a lean transformation team, so that's all about making the BBC more efficient, more effective, and day in, day out. Just this morning, we reach 97% of the UK population every week with our programmes, so that gives us a great opportunity to engage with the UK population on issues of climate change and sustainability. This Sunday, you'll see Attenborough at 90 on BBC One. Just this morning on Radio 2, on the Chris Evans Breakfast Show, I don't know if any of you are Radio 2 listeners, but the BBC weatherman Peter Gibbs was on there talking about going back to Antarctica, and that's going to be on Horizon tonight on BBC 2. So a range of things, both sort of in the corporate world and also engaging with audiences. But my panel today is a really fantastic panel who I think are going to share some really interesting things. So just first of all, I've got Naresh Ramchandani. My little bit of Google research revealed that this man created the best ad in the world back in the day. It was a little while ago, but the people in Cannes thought it was very good. He's been a partner at Pentagram since 2010, and he's co-founder and creative director at Do the Green Thing. And if you were watching at the very beginning, when we were looping around lots of interesting images, there were lots of really powerful ones from Do the Green Thing on there. We've inspired 40 million people around the world to live greener lives. Next to Naresh, I've got Lucy Davis, who has worked at the Donmar, at the National Theatre Wales, and is currently Executive Director at the Royal Court Theatre, and also Chair of the London Theatre Consortium, which has brought together about 14 theatres, and you've been working for about 5 years on how to become more sustainable and sort of share those issues with audiences. On Lucy's right, I've got Professor Dilys Williams, whose job title is nearly as long as some of the job titles of the BBC. Professor of Fashion Design for Sustainability and Director of the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, London College of Fashion, University of the Arts, London. Behind international collections from Liberty and Whistles, and actually established the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, really been responsible for embedding these issues in education around fashion design. And then finally, needing no introduction, Alison Tickell, who's brought us all here together today, the director of Julie's Bicycle, started looking at the music industry in 2007, and since then broadened much more widely. So we're going to hear from each of the panel for a maximum of 5 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a chat, and then we'll open it out to all of you. First of all, let's hear from Naresh.
Right. Hi, everyone. I must confess to being a little confused, perhaps slightly intimidated by the question, which is institutions as transition, which sounds like a very, very difficult philosophical essay subject. So I'll try and answer it in simple terms, which is in that I think for me personally, which I suppose is a little bit more connected to the last session, but I'll mention it just for a second. I think when I first started in advertising, you mentioned when I was doing, you mentioned a job I did a while back. I don't think I was very conscious about advertising's ability or communication's ability or responsibility to actually serve the greater good. I think it was more, I was in my 20s, early 30s, etc., and it was an interesting job choice because I thought it was very stimulating, and I thought the idea of persuading people to buy things or do things they wouldn't otherwise do was a really, really interesting, psychologically and creatively interesting job. But I wasn't really a person who questioned what the thing was that we were asking people to buy or do. And I think what happened, after a while is awareness of A, the power of communication, and B, the extent of problems which communications could help, at least try and help to solve. I became more aware of those things, and I think going right up to now 2006, 2007, which is when I first met you, Alison. We, working with a friend of mine, Andy Hobsbawm, we decided to do something about it, and we created Do the Green Thing, which is a charity, it's not an institution, where we thought all the ability that the marketing and advertising and creative world has, which is amazing to make people do things, because with creativity, we've got magic in our hands, and we can actually put ideas out there that actually change, in a small way or big way, can change the way people think. And we thought, what if we could actually deploy some of that magic and some of that power to seeing if sustainability can be promoted with the same type of desirability? What if we can take those skills and use them to actually drive a different agenda and not make sustainability something you feel you should do or ought to do, a responsibility, but actually something that could be desirable? So that was the kind of thesis that was born with the beginning of Do the Green Thing. And since then, for 8 years, we've been looking, I guess, to bring that thesis, to test that thesis and bring it alive. We've been helped across the years by, I think, if you were to call it an organization, there's a loose consortium of amazing thinkers and doers and creative collaborators, 500, 600 or more, I think, who've helped us put out bits of inspiration to try and reach as many people as possible and inspire them. And as you mentioned, we've got to, if you're counting it like a PR company, which I know one shouldn't, we've reached about 40, maybe 45 million people in our 8 years, which is not bad, but it's not enough. But that is a good example of an organization or a body sort of aggregating around, I think, a good cause. And the amount of people who've helped us is truly staggering and humbling, actually, if I'm honest. And we motor on. We've just launched a new issue today on Do the Green Thing, which is about taking on car culture in London to coincide with the mayoral elections that are happening this week, with the very, very provocative headline of why London's cars are like America's guns. We talk about how the car lobby is as powerful defending cars and their position in London as the gun lobby is for guns in American cities. It's provocative and playful and brought to life beautifully and creatively. But I think in terms of sort of going to institutions, if you think of Pentagram, I don't think Pentagram would like to think of itself as an institution. That's a difficult word. But I think my role within Pentagram as a co-founder and someone who helps to run Do the Green Thing is not just tolerated, but is very much encouraged. I think Pentagram understands that each person within Pentagram needs to find their own balance between what they do for commerce and what they do for the world. And also, I think, understands that Pentagram doing things like running an environmental or allowing an environmental charity to be run through it and within it is a good thing. I think it makes Pentagram more relevant and understanding to a broader base of people. So, wrap?
That doesn't mean you have to do a rap. Okay. So we've got magic on our hands. Lucy, you've got theatrical magic at the Royal Court. Tell us what you've been doing.
Okay, I've written mine down so that I really will be 5 minutes. So forgive me, I'm going to read from a piece of paper. So it really follows on, actually, I think, about, I don't think any of us feel like we're institutions or don't want to think of ourselves as institutions, but we are, and we have responsibility for it. But I want to talk a bit about being a co-optimist and tell you what we've achieved at the London Theatre Consortium through our kind of collective change and how our work on sustainability has actually taught us how to work as a cooperative and as a consortium. It's that work that's given us a model that we're now applying to other priorities as a group of theatres. So it has transitioned our practice. And I also want to talk about my art form, theatre, and the work we make about climate change at the Royal Court, and how this too has taught us about our art form and about what theatre can be and has transitioned the art form for us. So I'm a Coptimist and a co-optimist. And I think there are lessons for other sectors, creative or not, in our practice and in the way we collaborate. So the London Theatre Consortium is a consortium of 14 not-for-profit, building-based producing theatres in London. We have a combined turnover of over 50 million and a staff body of over 1,500 people, but that core staff body rises 10 times when you think about all the freelance artists that we engage with in any given year, and it rises 100 times when you think about our audiences. So it's a big community. Theatres are generally run by two people: artistic directors who dream up the programme of work and commission it, and executive directors or executive producers who deliver the work and are responsible for the operational running of the theatres. And it is the executive directors, executive producers of the theatres who meet and form the London Theatre Consortium. We meet quarterly, subgroups meet in between that, and we talk to each other all the time. So it's a very active, very dynamic consortium of leaders. The consortium was established 5 years ago, inspired by the Arts Council, mainly to cohere around marketing and audience initiatives, but the group very quickly galvanised around other priorities, and sustainability was one of the first. And our work on this priority in partnership with Julie's Bicycle, which has been written up quite recently over the last 5 years, has really defined how we work as a collective, cooperative group of people, not competitively, on our own individual terms, and within our own individual scale and budgets, but aggregating that into some really meaningful actions and innovations. We are not a business, we're charities, we're not-for-profit theatres, we're publicly funded, so we don't have kind of huge amounts of money to invest in infrastructure, but we do feel a real sense of public duty and best practice and leadership. So our imperative really became about reduction of emissions, and we're on track. So since 2010, we've reduced carbon emissions by 15%. We've saved over 12,000 tonnes of carbon, and we've reduced our energy bills by £265,000 across the group. I think this combination of how we've worked together on this priority, there have been 6 ways. Sharing and aggregating data, working with partners like Julie's Bicycle, like SIPA, to build tools for us to do that, sharing skills and networks and best practice, writing up and publishing case studies, empowering our boards and our staff teams, and really importantly, not judging or competing with one another, but really inspiring and sharing aims and finding the right fit for the individual organisations. That's really taught us. Those 6 ways are exactly how we now cooperate as a group on other things. So we're applying this model to other priorities around workforce development, around diversity, around access, all sorts of other ways. So LTC's never been stronger as a consortium, and our work on this issue at Julie's Bicycle has really empowered us. This is my personal footnote. Of the 12 theatres that were involved in this work, 10 of those executive leaders were women. And around the table now, there are 14 theatres and 10 of those executive leaders are women. And our director of LTC is a woman. And I just feel very proud of this gender leadership and the way that we have all been a very inclusive, ambitious, dynamic group. So I also want quickly to talk about my theatre, the Royal Court, and why I'm Coptimistic about the art form. The Royal Court produces up to about 16 new plays every year. Every play is new and about the world now. And we are really committed to providing a platform to inform, to provoke, to question, and to imagine. Climate change, resource depletion, global social justice, species loss, energy ethics increasingly preoccupy our writers. I mean, really, really strikingly in the works we commission, these come up again and again and again, either implicitly or overtly. And our recent produced work in collaboration with scientists has included 10 Billion with Stephen Emmett and 2071 with Chris Rapley. Our current play, X by Ally McDowell, and a play we have in rehearsals, both imagine a context of climate change and species catastrophe. I'm being told to wrap, so I'm going to crack on to the last bit. I just want to say that we were invited to Brussels to stage 2071 for one evening, for free, hosted by the European Climate Foundation to an audience of 400 Brussels politicos. And they really understood and engaged with it as a world-class piece of theatre. It cost them a lot of money to stage it for one night. We had a touring party of 9 people to support the production. We needed a day and a half to get it in, and they needed to hire a major cultural space for it to work. So we know that a piece of work like 2071 really contributes to a conversation about climate change at a political level, not just at an artistic level. But it was also very significant work for us because it really contributed to a conversation about what theatre is and what theatre can be. And it has really developed our art form. So that's it.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. We'll bring more of that out in questions, I'm sure. Okay, Dilys, so tell us about the world of fashion and education and how institutions there are acting as a catalyst for positive change.
Okay, thank you. And hi to everyone. I know everybody's been here for quite a long time this afternoon, and there's been so many interesting conversations that I'd love to pick up on, but I know I've got my 5 minutes, so I too am going to try and be focused. I think it's interesting that we've had this conundrum around the word institution, and I think maybe it's because we think of the word institution as being something that's very fixed. However, if we look back at what it means to be a collective of people, an institution, a charity, a city, or whatever, then maybe we start to think differently. And I actually want to draw on an example from actually 500 BCE, where the Athenians made an oath to their citizens. And it was as follows: "We will strive for the ideals and the sacred things of this city, both alone and together with many. And we will transmit this city not less, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us." And I think that reminds us of this notion of a powerful intention, of hope, of a commitment to the common good, and about possibility. And Alison earlier on was talking about possibility and probability, rather than about problems and problem solving and fixing things. It's about honouring what's already good around us and our ambition for what we want to give to others. And I think if we remember that notion of institution, then actually we've got a different starting point. And who wouldn't want to have that kind of ethos in their organisation? However, we do have a problem that isn't necessarily being played out through all of our organisations. And as Patrick George said earlier on, that we have a real existential crisis around what we mean by reality and what it means to do something that's giving to others and what we want to give. And it's also been talked about, this notion of climate change consensus. 97% of climate scientists all agree climate change is happening. We've got it called, the era is called the Anthropocene, and yet there is no cultural consensus, no social consensus in how we live. How we live is totally at odds with what we know, apparently, or what's visible and what's seen is so. And we tend to be tackling it in a very rational kind of fixing the problem kind of manner. And this logic of efficiency takes and technical know-how takes us somewhere, but apparently out of the change that needs to be made in order to be able to keep the mandate of Cop21, 20% of what we need to do, we can do through that kind of efficiency. 80% of what we need to do is to be able to actually reimagine things and think things from a very different sense of who we are as people. And that's where creative institutions have an incredibly important role to play. So now is a better time than any for us to kind of take that leadership and not to be squeezed. We heard a little bit earlier on about this notion of arts institutions being only valued by their commercial opportunity, what they give to economic growth. Also, this notion of us becoming something that services a customer. It's time for us to be a far stronger and bolder in standing up for this notion of possibility. But we do know that life is a tripod, and these notions of communities are one part of three legs, really. Government and governance and big business has been talked about quite a bit this afternoon. And whilst we do have an amazing mandate with Cop21 to reduce our emissions, at the moment our incentives, our recognition, the support for what we do is still predominantly towards something that's very unsustainable. So this notion of creative institutions being far bolder together, and this afternoon is a great example of that, comes at a time where we really need to act on it. And we also do well to remember universities, for example, are built on an ethos of exploration of self in relation to the world. And the idea of disciplines are to be able to better understand that sense of self and sense of the world. So we now have a new kind of way of thinking about disciplines, and we are developing with others a discipline called Fashion Design for Sustainability. And it's a big exploration. It involves ecology, economy, it involves ideas around philosophy, it involves a notion of rationality of what we know, but it also completely is underpinned by this sense of what it means to be human in the world. And this notion of creating culture and identity is not as tangible, it's not as fixed, it's not as easy for us to be able to say where and how that contributes, but we see it around us all the time. And this notion of us working as an institution in combination with governments, but also in combination with the other leg, which is individuals. Each of us have a voice, and the idea of forming our ability to author our lives well is part of being human. But in a very idealistic, individualistic Western culture, this is being very much a sense of being put on a pedestal. And it's a notion that business and education actually is unfortunately supporting. This notion of the individual, the self, rather than the collective and the many. So I think as institutions, particularly as a university, being able to create that connection between a lot of individuals and working with the public, with a number of students, and working also with governments, we are that kind of sense of connection, but not just facilitators, not just connectors. We hopefully are the ones that actually have got the bold ambition based on this notion of the common good that maybe individuals don't have the opportunity to really connect together about, and maybe governments are too fixed to be able to understand. So
can
fashion,
I, just conscious of time here.
Just 1 minute then about fashion. So fashion, and why we're looking at this from the sense of fashion, is because it does connect those three senses of the tripod. It's something that's very individual, it's very personal. Each of us every day put on or adorn our skin in ways that is, for most of us, something that is part of our identity. Yet it's ubiquitous. It's the second most polluting industry in the world. It destroys lives as well as creating livelihoods. So what better to look at than the idea of fashion, because it connects institutions and it also connects this notion of what we mean by working collaboratively and our sense of selves in the world. So
okay.
Yes, as you can probably tell, I could go on.
Yeah,
But,
we'll hear more. Alison, what are your reflections?
So I'll try and be really quick and put the wrap as soon as you think you can. So I'll just own that it was my words, institution, and of course as soon as we got it out there we realised how problematic it was. But the impulse for having this session is because at Julie's Bicycle we've been lucky enough for the last nearly 9 years to be witnessing what's actually happening under our noses, which is really seriously around cultural transformation across the extraordinary range and breadth of organisations that we've been hugely privileged to be working with. So in this context, I am going to make a quick distinction between organisations and broader institutions that hold them, that set the policy and create often the strategic, the priority, the investment frameworks, because I think there is a difference there. And crudely, I think the creative ecology is made up of 4 parts: artists, creators, the organisations, the theatres, the design houses, the festivals, the venues and their supply chains, the institutions, the formal infrastructures such as funders, policymakers, and finally, of course, the artists, the audiences and all the people who the consumers, customers, citizens. It's a very dynamic fractal system, each part in relation to others. And JB, when we founded 9 years ago, was set up specifically to focus only on the organisations, first to persuade and then to support them to act on climate change. But of course, it's never as neat as that. The creative ecosystem, as I've said, is very dynamic, and it was obvious very early on to us that creators worked within organisations, so organisations work within bigger frameworks, and those are institutional frameworks. So it became very important to us to recognise what the role of the institution and the organisation was. What was that relationship? Institutions as large as the European Union, United Nations framework, or in fact local authorities. And the last 9 years has taught me just how much potential there is for the creative community in the context both of Coptimism but also our institutional relationships. We can be, and we already are, innovators, collaborators, incubators, we're attractors, we're amplifiers, and we gather and we distribute creative energy within and to institutions. In short, the organisations that make up the creative community are often the change agent that demonstrate cultural values. Of course, we're also often very problematic, the opposites of that, stuck, risk-averse, and difficult to shift. The difference in all of this, and Lucy's brought this up, is good leadership. Not always coming from senior levels, though at some stage that does become necessary, which optimises the energy of each individual and each function within our units. This makes everyone feel optimistic. I think we saw that at COP. We also saw it, as Nick has already pointed out, at Leicester City. The creative community does this all the time. It's the very nature of what we do. The quality of this burst of energy is what we see in artists and creatives, and it's what our organisations are often set up to do. So the question that I need to ask is, why aren't we using it more in this context? We started with some bigger frameworks that have done some great work in this. The Arts Council's move to make this part of their institutional DNA by making reporting a requirement has been hugely important, not just in this country, but internationally as well. Some 90 arts councils globally are now looking at their own policies, prompting initiatives and dialogues and conversations, both domestically and globally, about environmental sustainability and what it means for them. That's very significant, and that was led by Arts Council England. This forcing is really important in the climate change challenge. Stories, which the arts are constantly defaulting to, are a critical part of it, but they're not, in my view, in themselves enough. There is a serious job now that we have of transitioning with all our might towards the 1.5 degree ambition. There is a place for forcing this issue, and I think that's one of the roles that the arts organisations can have in the context of our relationship to institutions. Then there are microcosms of institutions, if you like, the collaborative approach, which was so important at COP. Lucy's described that. These organisations that are coming together and working together. The London Theatre Consortium is a wonderful example of that. Just to say that the London Theatre Consortium are an example of attaining the Paris target. They've been working systematically. If they continue to do what they've been doing over the last 5 years, they are the living, breathing experience of the Paris Agreement. So it's very exciting. And there are many others like that. There's the Manchester Arts Sustainability Group. There's Powerful Thinking, which is a group of festivals that are working together on all of this, and the individual organisations. I just want to mention people like Whitworth Art Gallery, Manchester Museum, Royal Court. There are hundreds and hundreds of them that are under our nose. So institutional change is an indication of cultural values having landed. Indeed, of exemplifying new norms. So it's really important that we reinforce and we ask for greater stretch within the institutions that we're working with and with others. As we all know, the cultural movement is building, and we need to ask ourselves now what institutional change we want. It might be divestment and investment. It might be a clean energy infrastructure, partnerships with cities. Is it curating cultural values, or is it to join cultural policy with climate change policy, or is it all of those things? Our institutions that support us need us. They set the agenda, but we can affect it, and we must. I think that's all I'll say, because I need to wrap.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks very much. Some really interesting points. We'll come out to hear from the audience as well. And also, I think we're live streaming as well, so if there's anyone watching on the live stream that wants to send comments through via Twitter, I think they'll be conveyed to us as well. There was a lot of talk there about collaboration. And I think, Lucy, you mentioned the London Theatre Consortium, and that sounds like, you know, you're firing on all cylinders, solving all sorts of problems, but, you know, so there's lots of people in this room who could talk about examples where they've tried to collaborate, and collaboration is not always easy. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you might have encountered and how we can, with the theme of being Coptimistic, how we can overcome them.
I think it is about leadership. It's what Julie, Alison was saying, and what Julie's Bicycle have done to really support, you know, where it looks like people, you know, and collaboration can be two people, but or two organisations, but where it looks like there's a will, if you can then build the structures around you and find a way to do it on individual terms, but with a collective aim, then, you know, good leadership will drive that through. I mean, if we work in the creative sector, there are hurdles every single day with everything that we do with our work. So, you know, I think it's about being optimistic, it's about finding ways through, and about keeping your eye on the long term, which again is something that we don't often do. We often plan, and we do short-term planning in our organisations, so it's about shifting our view.
Okay. Alison, you were talking as well about the need to almost put pressure on, when you were talking about institutions, whether it's sort of funding bodies, etc., people who can sort of set structures. You talked about the Arts Council earlier, and we heard from them, who've been really good. Are there others that we need to be focusing on at the moment? Or what would your priorities be?
I mean, I think we should. I think that right now there are a bunch of invitations, some of you have heard them today, from really major bodies, particularly around the city agenda, the urban agenda, around how we actually make COP a reality. They're not hearing from us, and a lot of this whole day is actually about saying we need now to take this movement that everybody's feeling and talk up, and there are plenty of invitations.
Okay, so we've got to grasp those opportunities.
We absolutely do, yeah.
Now, I just wonder if I could turn to you to say one of the questions we were thinking about today was, you know, there's lots of big pockets here of great practice going on in different places. How can we amplify the effect of each other's work? How can we sort of publicize that? How can we share it?
Can I answer the collaboration question?
Of course you can.
Because I think collaboration is easy. It just in our experience with Do the Green Thing, I was thinking about that. It's we've worked with lots of different artists or designers or writers or illustrators or filmmakers or agencies or production companies, and we've done it for 7.5 or 8 years, I can't count, and we've had one bad experience over that time, and and it was just a personality disorder between us and another person. And for all the other people, hundreds of people, it's been really, really simple, the collaboration. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One is about when you both want exactly the same thing, so that the better it gets with one person, the better it gets with the other person. So working with these creative collaborators, they want to do something really bold and creatively brilliant, and we want them to do something bold and creatively brilliant. The more brilliant they make it for them, the better it becomes for us. And so that's one thing, isn't it? Is actually to have the same rules for success, I think, because if you can find a person to work with where you share that, I think the collaboration is always going to be successful. And then the second thing, I think, is always for one party, if not both, to be relaxed about taking the credit, i.e. not taking the credit, because I think we've always felt at Do the Green Thing that it's about giving as much credit to the collaborators as possible, because if that's what they need, we will say it's this piece of work by David Strigley, or it's this piece of work by Sir Quentin Blake, or this director or that illustrator. And we always do that first, because we kind of know that we're sort of somewhat credited somewhere at the background. It doesn't really matter. And yet that's not the issue, because the issue is just putting the most powerful piece of communication in to solve a common problem, which is how you make the world sustain, right?
Yeah.
And so I think just taking away that credit issue, so it doesn't become a battle of, oh, we did this, no, you did this, no, it's your name first, no, it's our name first, makes collaboration so easy, I think, so simple. And actually means the other party is also always generous back as well. So I think that's our little formula, I think, is finding commonality where success is the same for both parties, and then us, at least first, always saying, it's your gig first, thank you for doing it for us.
Dennis, the world of fashion can be a pretty cutthroat world. I'm just interested on your reflections as to whether this idea of kind of working together and not being more relaxed about who takes credit for things, etc. Do you see applicability there?
I do. I think that it's not only in fashion. I think, yes, to pick up on what Naresh said, we ourselves have to start this notion of looking at the collective and giving collective credit rather than the named designer or the named, when there's always a team. We always work collaboratively. Fashion is not made by one person. It's a collaborative endeavor. It includes seamstresses, it includes pattern cutters, it includes designs. So being able to honor all of those people involved in the making, and I know that Ursula and Filippo from Fashion Revolution are here somewhere, that were here earlier on, who are through Fashion Revolution, talking very specifically about giving credit to the people that make clothes, because giving visibility to all the people that are involved is paramount, and actually it's kind of far more fair and it's more real. Everybody knows that there's a lot of people involved, and so yeah, we've got to get over this habit and this kind of institutionalized notion of putting people on a pedestal and then everybody else involved is apparently not as important. And I think changing education is really important in that, and it's happening, but also changing the way in which fashion is seen. I mean, we've got quite a few different projects that are about this notion of fashion as a set of relationships, as a social good. The material effects of it and what we wear and how we wear it is one part of it, but that's one part of a much bigger kind of life process. And it's far more exciting and interesting if we see it in that greater form.
And I wonder as well, perhaps I can start with you, but open it out to the rest of the panel as well, thinking about working at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion Design, or whatever, I can't remember the exact name, but coming up with doing research on particular prototypes or things or whatever. How easy is it to scale up these solutions? How easy is it to because that's what we need, the scale of the challenge is enormous, and we can do sort of good things in small areas, but how do we go about scaling up our solutions more broadly?
Scale to transformation is something that we've been working on, and I think that it's not just about scaling up, it's about scaling out as well. And we work with individuals, with small businesses, and most fashion businesses in the UK are small businesses. So we work with lots of small businesses looking at different ways of doing things. We also work with very big businesses, from Nike to Kering to H&M, and how we work with those different organisations has to be about where they can make the biggest change and where we can make the biggest change by working with them. And it'd be very different with working with a small business who's setting out to maybe have a completely different way of thinking about what fashion is, and they've got the agility to do that. Big businesses can't necessarily change overnight. There was a conversation earlier on about only working with people who you really trust their intention. So as long as you can work with people who you trust that their intention is actually to make change that might be difficult for them or might be uncomfortable, then I think we need to look at ways we can do that in all sorts of different places. And fashion is about lots of different things in lots of different places. It's definitely not just about scaling up. It's scaling out. Way.
Other thoughts on that?
I would just say that in my field, big organisations have always nicked the ideas of little organisations. If small organisations do something really innovative, either artistically or operationally, that's good, then that gets pinched. And I think that there's a real model about how things cascade up as well as cascade down.
Interesting.
And I definitely think that happens in the theatre for sure. And again, it just becomes about the leadership then being able to drive that through the organisation.
And are there sufficient mechanisms, whether at theatre or elsewhere, to enable the big boys to learn from what the little guys are doing?
Yeah, always pinching.
Always. Okay. I think on that, let's open it out to the audience. We've got one question there. If we can get a microphone to this gentleman, if you can say who you are first, and then what your question is.
I think it's fascinating, Neil Johnston. I think it's fascinating that we put institutions and transition together. There's a bit missing in the middle, which is the mechanics of transition. Now, we can sort of burble on about our own particular missions and visions. There is, in fact, alongside Cop21, the Sustainable Development Goals, which provide us with a modern equivalency to a set of values that we can all work to. I'm a great believer in diversity, but unless we're prepared to unify our views with regard to the imperatives of climate change and its effects, unless we can unify our thinking into a set of values, and the Sustainable Development Goals are those values, how else do you see us meeting objectives that we've kind of ambitioned today?
Okay. Any other points right now, or would the panel take that? Let's get the point at the back as well, and then we'll come to the panel.
Thanks. Hello, it's Luke again from Carbon Culture. I guess with institutions, my feeling is that if you wanted institutions to solve climate change, you wouldn't pick the ones that we have. And I wonder whether, all the institutions that we're working with, particularly in this country, many of them are hundreds of years old now. To what extent is the solution to work with the institutions we have, and to what extent do we need to smash them and start new ones?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that. Was that your point? Was to what extent do we have the institutions that we need?
Yeah, and to what extent do we need to destroy those institutions and start new ones?
Okay. So over to the panels. First of all, can we all subscribe to the common goals? And secondly, should we be destroying our existing institutions and forming brand new ones? Who would like to take that?
I'm happy to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay.
And yes, great point. And in fact, next week we've got something called the Youth Fashion Summit that's bringing together students from over 100 students from over 30 countries to look at fashion for a few days, and very specifically in response to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're able to do that because those students have been learning a little bit about what they mean, about the ideas around what it means to have an ethic as a designer, and also to understand how much power you have as a designer. And I see myself in the last 5 or 6 years a huge change. We could not have put on a summit for 3 days about the Sustainable Development Goals for fashion students 3 years ago or 4 years ago. They would have been floundering. Whereas now we're already starting to see that people are really engaging with the ideas and have now got some of the means and some of the skills to be able to do that. But we do need to educate differently. Designers need to have a different kind of skill set. It's not just about pattern making, and it's this ability to deal with real world problems and to deal with the ambiguities of those things. So the Sustainable Development Goals for us have been something very, very clearly helpful in what we do. The students next week are not going to completely finish their ideas. Hopefully it'll start the ideas that they'll then take back to lots of different countries. But I think it's a really, really important question to make, and I think that for us it's been something that's really helped us.
Eris, do you want to come in?
I was going to answer it very simplistically by saying a good friend of mine that some of you might know, who's John Grant, who wrote a good, he writes many great things actually. He said something very strong, struck me very deeply a couple of years ago when he was writing one of his many books, which is about just the idea of being net good. And I think it's an interesting thing because it's a sort of an internal measure about just being either a person or an institution that does more good than harm. Right? It's such an easy thing because, in a way, more powerful than any sort of sustainable development goals, I think, is the idea that you as a citizen, or you as an organization as a citizen, is here to, it's like your Athenian oath, I think, is actually to leave something in a better state than you do. And I think, there are sort of two factors for that. I think one is endeavor, so it's about having a conscience to do that. And the other one is, if that doesn't work, it's about having regulation, right? So I remember when I was growing up studying the world of advertising and looking at, Tim will be very pleased to find out, D&AD annuals from years gone by, and finding this amazing thing, which is these cigarette adverts for things like Silk Cut, and with these extraordinary kind of spells. They weren't allowed to say anything because they're just doing hugely, wonderfully symbolic, kind of cool campaigns. But the amazing thing was that was 70% of the ad, and the 30% below was saying cancer kill, cigarettes causes cancer, cigarettes kill, etc. And there you've got kind of regulation, but you've got sort of 70-30. And I think if an organization or a person or a human at any level can find their own way of actually doing more good than harm, then great. If not, then it should be that you are regulated in a way to either do through what you produce or how you communicate, do as much good as harm. And I think that that would be revolutionary and wonderful, and that would be better than an SDG, or as good as, I think.
Alison, what do you think? Do we have the institutions we need?
We've got some of them, and
what else do we need?
I think we need to our notion of who we are. We've talked a lot about this today. We need a lot of silo busting. We need institutions that actually have got that kind of ethos that we've been talking about, that having a sense of shared good ethical purpose. We need far more of that. There's a movement, it's not happening fast enough. I think one of the points that Neil was making about Sustainable Development Goals and Cop21 is that these have been imposed upon global governance frameworks from externally. It's always been very clear that the Sustainable Development Goals are not going to work without the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement is not going to work without the Sustainable Development Goals. So the two have always been considered as being very, very closely connected. What's not happening, though, is that those connections are being made, the two are being made together very, very clearly. So they're two examples, if you talk about institutions we need, of separate negotiations, separate actors that actually need to come together. And again, looking at the role of the arts and culture and the creative sector, I think we have a role to play here, which is to articulate some of that coming together in all the diverse, interesting, difficult and, you know, ambitious ways that we have heard about today, but we've got to push ourselves up. Those kinds of institutional divisions are really not helpful now.
Yeah.
And so I'm not so sure, Luke, that it's about smashing institutions. Some absolutely need to just sort of depart. But actually, it's about a different way of relating to, being in relation to this notion of institution, and breaking some of those divisions that we traditionally work by.
Okay. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Lisa, do you want to just come in on that?
I just want to say one really quick thing that I was going to say in my 5 minutes, but I'm sneaking it in there.
Cheat.
Which someone once said to me that the most important thing you can do as an institution is apply your core business to the issue of climate change. I think what a lot of institutions do is go, oh, should I change my energy supplier, and should we think about our travel? But actually, so someone said to me, you guys, you make world-class theatre, so just make world-class theatre about climate change, and it's what Do the Green Thing did. They just, you've made those pieces of advertising, working with leading artists about the issue of climate change. And I think, in terms of institutions, I think that's something that I say, it was a climate scientist who said that to me. It wasn't a practitioner. But I think that's something we've thought about a lot at the Royal Court.
Exactly. It's what you're brilliant at. It's what we're all brilliant at. So therefore, it makes sense to apply that to the big challenge. Okay, point in the front row.
Hi, Glenn from Liberate Tate. I wanted to expand on this point of why institutions matter. You opened this up by saying, it can be about governments, it can be about business. Well, no, sorry, it's about institutions. Institutions do matter because they are the infrastructure through which we will navigate our future, our way to a sustainable future. They matter because they can be like the UN and forge SDGs. In Paris, we launched the fossil-free culture movement because we actually care that it matters that the Louvre is sponsored by oil companies. And so I really want the panel really to speak a little bit more as to why public institutions, whether they be arts and culture or more broadly, matter, and therefore why we need to transform them, whether it's destroying the old, making them change, or bringing new ones on board.
Okay,
Thanks.
so why public institutions matter. And any other final points people want to raise?
I'm going to be really cheeky and ask a very quick question, which picks up on actually pretty much everyone's presentations, and that's the idea of institutions incubating within them what Patrick referred to as kind of moments of the future, I think. So, for example, Do the Green Thing being a charity within an advertising company, what does that do to the institution? And should we be doing more of that? Should our institutions be incubating more movements for change?
Okay, and just one final point at the last, and then we'll come to the panel.
Rose Fenton from Free Word. A point about institutions and actually education. There's a whole movement out there called Rethinking Economics, which is challenging the way that economics are taught in every university across this planet. And actually, how can we move forward unless there's a whole group of people thinking about the economy in a different way? And as I think New Economics says, Foundation says, at the moment our economic system is completely unviable. It's unstable, unfair, produces unhappy people. And what's needed is a shift to happen in our values, something somebody mentioned earlier, also a new story to emerge, and also big popular movements to emerge. And I think we're seeing some of the emergence of that now, but talking about challenging our institutions, they do need to be challenged.
Okay, so 3 points there. One about how our institutions need to be challenged, and a particular example of how economics education is being rethought, and a lot of pressure on that. The point about why public institutions matter, panel's thoughts on that, and how organisations or institutions can incubate these moments of the future, and how they can do that, and I guess the impact on the broader organisation of doing that. So who'd like to take any of those?
Maybe I can start with the third one. I think it is incredibly important that curriculum is changing, and that's why I went from being a designer working in industry to coming to work in academia, because I think the biggest change that we can possibly make is through changing education, changing curriculum, and it always has been. You know, if you look back through the centuries where people started to learn new languages, were open to new ideas, new sense of philosophy. So I'm really excited about this idea that lots of different educational institutions are rethinking what it means to not only the content of the curriculum, but how it's being delivered. This notion of actually the student as being a co-mutual learner with a tutor. It's breaking down lots of different hierarchies, and it's not going to be easy because a lot of people have been educated in particular ways with a sort of transmissive, sit there and listen and then go and learn it and then repeat it. And so I think this big change is happening on lots of different levels. And certainly we're seeing through our own work and through the changes that we've made in the curriculum, yeah, it's sometimes really challenging for us as tutors, but we're all learning and we all need to learn because it's a whole new set of curriculum that we need to develop. So it is new disciplines, and some of those disciplines draw on lots of very, very established disciplines and bring them together in different ways, but some of them are actually new ways of learning that are in our context of the Anthropocene are really necessary for us to build. And I think ways in which, whether it's schools and universities or different disciplines learning from each other, there's a huge opportunity, but it needs to happen more quickly than it currently is, and we need a lot more support from governments in relation to creative education. But yes, I could talk about that for a while too.
Yeah, just quickly to build on that, I think there's sort of a couple of levels of which, I mean, we all represent organizations in the sort of creative-ish sphere, and we can sort of set a good example with our practice, how we sort of behave ourselves, but I think actually our main tools, our main chance of affecting mainstream culture, of tackling this beast called consumerism, is actually to set a vision.
Yeah.
It's actually to set a vision. It's really interesting. You talked about rethinking economics, because in a way that's what needs to happen. I think in different ways we all need to, and in a joined up way, which I think is the most important thing of all, we all need to put forward a vision for a different way of living that doesn't put the amount of stuff you have first, but has a different value system underneath it about being creative or resourceful and making those strengths not negative things. And I think that vision piece is, I think, what we have potentially, you know, like some of the theatre productions you're putting on, is our greatest and most persuasive, or our biggest weapon.
Lucy and Alison, do you want to
just picking up on the public institution, because I think it's a really important question. Of course, public institutions matter. I think probably they matter, well, no, for sure. They matter now more than they have ever mattered. They are the custodians of the world in which we live. So in terms of do they matter, the answer is an emphatic yes. And I think that it is incumbent on all of us, and as what I was saying earlier, that we challenge them where we feel that they are failing us. And in the context of a lot of current policy, not just in the field of climate change, but actually in the field of social justice, in the field of fairness, in the field of education, in the field, all over, we're seeing a catastrophic failure of our public institutions at the moment, in my view. And it is critical that we challenge them. So in a sense, just coming right round to the beginning of the day, this is all about us as an extraordinarily rich, creative community coming together and asking of our institutions, both within our own worlds, but also externally, what is the nature of the challenge and how are we rising to meet it? So yes, they do. And this whole day, I hope, is an invitation to start doing something about that.
Very good point. Lucy, is there anything you wanted to add?
Nothing.
That's brilliant. All right, I just wanted to thank our panel very much. Thank you.
And thank you, Adrian, for chairing so beautifully. And sorry for being the time Nazi. Fascinating. Everyone at the back, feel free to take a seat. We're going to take a moment with the chairs of all of the breakout sessions now to just summarize the thoughts that have come from all of the sessions throughout today. And then we have a very exciting announcement to make over a glass of wine. So take your seats. Thank you again to the panel, and we'll be regrouping in just a couple of minutes.
Lovely listening to you too.
Oh, thank you.
I love your So what we thought we'd do is just to finish off, because there's been so much going on and we haven't all been able to go to all the sessions, is to pull together the chairs of each of the sessions, just to ask them for 2 or 3 really key things that they've learned, that they've brought away, with recommendations for how we can take this forward. Then after that, there's going to be a short break, and then we're going to launch our big new idea of the Creative Climate Coalition. So can I just ask, I'll start with you. Why don't you come up here, so the live streaming and just
Okay. Hi, I'm Adrian from the BBC, for those of you who don't know, and I was just chairing a session on how institutions can act as a catalyst for change. Some really interesting points come out of it. One, that we should be all seeking to apply our core business to climate change. Think about what we're good at and then do that and think how it can help. There was the phrase that we've got magic in our hands. We're lucky to work in creative industries. How can we do something with that? Secondly, about the vital importance of collaboration. This is a huge challenge that we can't do it on our own, but we can achieve fantastic things when we work together. That collaboration will have challenges, but really strong leadership can help overcome those, and the right kind of attitude, so not being relaxed about the credit, sharing credit. And thirdly, the idea of not just scaling up solutions, but scaling out solutions. So thinking about what a small business might need compared to a big one, etc. But the idea that little nimble operations can often come up with the best, most innovative ideas, and it's okay for the big guys to steal those if they're helping us to achieve these goals.
Thank you. That's Fartikal from Energy.
Yes, I was energy, ethics and climate change, and we were the 2 things that I thought well, it was all incredibly interesting, but 2 things to call out. The first was the role that the arts have to play in being this hugely inspirational role where you foster the relationship between people and ideas. And I think a lot of people in our group were saying how important it is that the arts start with the individual and the visceral, and that is something that is immensely powerful, and making that connection is incredibly important. And then the second was practically thinking about, once you've done that, how do you then identify the system that you're trying to change, the intervention points within it, and then applying network theory. And we had a really good example of this in our group, which I just wanted to share, which was a small piece of work that was taking place in Tower Hamlets, where it was started off as a sort of mural on endangered species in a disused area of disused arches in Tower Hamlets. And that has become a global piece of work, and has actually ended up in Brooklyn Street Art. So it's been a way of, which is a magazine that street artists use all the time. So it was a really good example of how you take a very small idea in a small location, and you take it not just to different communities and across the globe, but you also take it to new communities who have not been exposed to ideas about climate change. And it was just a very practical example of the sort of things that we might be asking to come out of the collaborations that we've been discussing today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barry Wadilla from the KTN, and we were talking about a new economy, a circular economy, redesigning systems. And we had a really lively debate in the room. But I think some of the things that I'd like to share from the discussion were that for a lot of organizations, it's great to just start with a small experiment, prototype your idea, experiment, grow the idea, share what's possible with the organization in order to make the case for change. And we had a healthy discussion about leadership. Does the leadership come from the big brands? Does it come from policymakers? Yes, definitely it should, but I think often it takes a good startup to demonstrate the case study that makes those people wake up. So I think both are valuable. And I think we had some excellent examples on the panel of businesses that have really come on a long way in just the last 2 years. I mean, the circular economy as an idea has grown very rapidly. It is only one idea of many in the sustainability space, but it's one that's had real focus and a lot of passion in the last couple of years, and I think that makes a real difference.
Okay, so what did we think in our session? I think probably the thing that came out to me very strongly is we need to get a bit more angry. We need to be willing to fight a little bit harder and push a little bit harder for the change that we think we want to see. It kind of went back to the quote that I think Matt raised about artists don't make anything up from John Lennon, and that we're actually reflecting something from the world. So what is it we want to reflect? I think that also there was a big call out about the fact that we really need to hold government to account. As artists, we have the strength and the power to do that. We have the voice to do that. And then I guess conversely, there was the recognition that we do need to collaborate, that we are existing within a current paradigm, and within that paradigm, we have to work with the people who are in front of us now to try and make the change that we want to see. And again, not that I want to overquote Matt, but I thought that he talked about the idea of us as a group coming up with a territory of commonality. We need one strong, clear voice that is expressed in many, many different ways that everyone can engage with.
Okay, and just to sort of reiterate some of the stuff that came up at the beginning, which was the urgency of the issue, the fact that we do have a window of opportunity and we need to take it, and what does that look like for us? We talked about the importance of involving other communities that we really need to seek and support other voices in this grand endeavour, and recognising the role that the creative community might have in coming together and speaking, scaling up and out. I think that's all in terms of the formal proceedings today. So that's just about it. I just want to, first of all, thank all the organisations who've supported this, specifically the Arts Council England, the London College of Fashion and the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, the Knowledge Transfer Network, King's College London, Good Energy, Neal's Yard Remedies, Somerset House, Albert, BAFTA and D&AD, all of whom have been really exciting and very enthusiastic and great partners. I'd also like to thank all the speakers, all the lightning talks this morning, all the chairs, and of course everybody who's come. We are extremely grateful. You have been so welcome, and it's been such an interesting and an exciting day. I'd like to have a special thanks for Shola Johnston, who's there. Who has been quite extraordinary from the beginning of this idea right through to today. Thank you. And finally, we've got a short break where we're going to clear the chairs, and then we would really welcome you all to come back and have a much needed, I think, drink. But we'd also like to launch our Creative Climate Coalition. So as many of you who can stay for that, please do. It does mean this quick turnaround. So we'll clear the room as quickly as we possibly can, and then just do come back in. You're welcome to grab a drink before you go if you're desperate. No, you don't need to leave, apparently. Sorry. Stay. Grab a drink. We'll do it around you. Sorry.
So I'm going to stay for this, but I have...
Oh, good.
Jim's gone to...